Good evening, everyone. The time is 6:04, and we are calling to order the Duncanville City Council special meeting for a budget workshop on Tuesday, June 30th, 2021. An order in accordance with an order of the Office of the Governor issued March 6, 2020, has extended the City Council for the City of Duncanville to conduct a City Council meeting in person and by video at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, June 30th, in order to advance public health goals, limiting face-to-face meetings, also called social distancing, in an effort to slow the spread of coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to limited seating in council chambers, persons or participants may attend by video in order to maintain safe social distance as provided in this notice. Okay, we are underway. We do have a quorum. We are missing council member Jeremy Kuntz, which I neglected to say last night because I didn't know he wasn't coming. I found out tonight that he intended not to come last night, and he is absent tonight as well, for the record. Moving on to item number 2 on the agenda, receive public comments. We do have one individual who has submitted a comment, which I will read. And this is from Betty Taylor, no address indicated. Good evening. I would like to make a public statement to the council. As a tax-paying citizen, it is terribly sad that all this council approves is the following: chicken shacks, dollar stores, and pawn shops. This community is slowly going down. There is no reason why we should have to travel less than 2 miles to get a decent meal. What we are doing is giving our monies to other communities, help them with their tax base. It would be nice if the city of Duncanville would try to attract restaurants and other businesses to our community. There are too many empty buildings in this community to help with tax revenue in this community. I would also like to encourage council members to get out in the district to see the neighborhoods, to speak with the constituents that voted them into office. By doing so, we can and will build a better Duncanville, making sure that their district needs are being met. Keep in mind the elders of this community may need your assistance. We can do better in this community, but it starts with you, city manager. Okay, we are moving on to our pre-budget workshop for fiscal year 2021-22. Discussion of topics related to current year budget, next year fiscal budget planning, including the following general topics. And turning it over to Budget Administrator Jennifer Odie and Interim Finance Director Adina Atmore at such an appropriate time.
All right, hello everyone. We're going to start today. We have a number of topics that we're going to cover today. The first thing is one of the things we failed to mention at the beginning, and I believe we did this in our budget workshop, that was our town hall meeting. We had some questions that came up, and we asked for citizens' input as we start to look at FY 21 and 22's budget. From that, again, that first time is always the hard one. Okay. I should just press it. Just press it. It's not on. Yeah, fine. That's okay. No, quite. Okay. We hosted a virtual budget town hall meeting, excuse me, sir, on April 13th, 2021. We had about 14 participants by Zoom. We also conducted a survey. We received 21 responses, and the purpose of our survey is to find out what our citizens want. We generally try to do this in person, but as everyone's aware, due to COVID, we were unable to do a in-person. Of the questions we asked, the first questions we said, during the current and previous budget, the city has faced several severe financial challenges due to COVID-19. What services would you be willing to reduce or sacrifice to address the existing challenges? Provide up to 3 answers. So as we look at the responses received, the one that was recommended most was park beautification, special projects. Then we came with special events, employee pay, rec center and library hours, code enforcement, and then staff travels. The second question we ask is, if there was an economic recovery from COVID-19 and operating revenues exceeded expenditures, funding available for services or projects, what new services or amenities would you like to see within the city of Duncanville to provide? We asked them to give us up to 3 answers in this. The top answer, as many of you are aware, is homestead exemption. The next is road and sidewalks. Next comes special events, economic development, programming classes, and parks with 3. And then dog park 2 employee increase 2, and 1 for public transportation. The third question is, tell us what types of services do you feel are adequately meeting the needs of our Duncanville residents? And this is our chance to say, what are we doing good? Our top one was trash and bulk pickup. Oh, sorry, Parks and Recreation. Where's my Parks and Recreation? Parks and Recreation, I'm sorry, Bart. They feel that is doing. Next was trash and bulk pickup, library, police, fire. Then the third is cleanup litter, and the first is code enforcement. Tell us what types of services you feel adequately meeting the needs of our residents. I heard that. Our fire folks said they filled out 12 surveys there. But I think this is important. But to our citizens and to council, as we start, and this is my first year and our team, many of our team's first year at this level, we want to next year expand it to do more engagement, to also, I know you are the voices of your constituents, but we also want to help and start to do more customer satisfaction and surveys to find out what people want and what they need, and also talk about some budget scenarios. And so this is vital information, and as we go through today, we're going to talk a little bit about our revenues, we're going to talk about our baseline expenditures, and how we're moving forward with getting to our proposed budget. So although we say these are proposed numbers, these are preliminary numbers that are not set in stone, because we know there's still information to be obtained before we actually submit it. But it also gives us a chance to get feedback from each of you on how you feel we're going, as well as what things you want to see in our budget. And I'm going to now ask Jennifer to take us through your potential revenue. Each of you should have a PowerPoint and larger font to follow through. If you have additional information you want, we are here, and I will be standing over here to help with any questions.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Council, thank you very much. So picking up where we left off yesterday, potential outlook for revenues. I'm going to start with the general fund. In similar fashion as we presented it to you last night, but I'm going to go into much greater detail with each revenue category. I'm going to spend some time educating you exactly how we get those revenues in, how we are anticipating, projecting the proposed cost or the proposed revenue. I'm going to walk you through each of these things, and we're going to spend some time on them, okay? So, but if you look at the big picture, the global picture here for the general fund, the proposed bottom line there for total revenue at this time, the preliminary number comes to $34.2 million. That is a variance of $1.6 million increase over the adopted budget of 2021. Okay, I put in the actual column there to give us a kind of a comparison of where we ended up, so you have that as a reference point.
But the percentages are
The percentages what? And the variances are based, the proposed against the adopted, not against the actual. The actual is just there for information, but the calculation is based on those two columns.
So my personal feeling is 2021 adopted is an anomaly. In terms of using it as a baseline, I'm not really comfortable with that. I'm more comfortable with using 2019, 2020 actual. What's your opinion?
I think both of these years, you can consider it an anomaly because we started the pandemic in March of 2020. So half of our year in 1920 was pandemic response. Yes, we had to make considerations when we talked about the budget at this time last year because we did not know when the pandemic was going to end. So perhaps a better baseline is taking it a year even further in the past. Because again, I think both of these years you would see kind of an anomaly because of being right in the middle.
And this is probably where I would probably comment. Normally I would say 3 years for the trading was too far out, but this is probably the time I would say that 3-year trend would help a little bit. Though I agree with what you're saying.
You did provide some information here, and this is just on the revenues, but
I agree with you.
Actually, this will answer.
A lot of information on this sheet, but we're providing you this just so you can look back and see actuals from not just last year, but the preceding 2 years, so you can see that moving target, if you will. Okay. But as we go through this presentation, we can certainly reference this information as well because it will be in the presentation. Obviously not, the preceding years is not included here, but you can still look at it as a reference point. So let's dive in, shall we? Okay, we're gonna start with property tax, okay? Or actually, let me show you this graph first. This is the breakdown in a pie chart, obviously, of all the revenues and how that breaks down. Property tax, of course, being our number one revenue source, followed by sales tax, and then all the various other revenue sources. Okay, so property tax. Property tax is, at this point, preliminary because we do not have the certified tax rolls from DCAT. We will not receive those certified numbers until July 27th. At this point, the best we can do is take into consideration what we have done in the past based on the certified rolls, how they've come in, and looking at our preliminary projections at this point. We have received 3 preliminary projections of where the DCAD will think the properties will be. Now, what I did is I took a look back the previous 5 years, okay? They are saying, I mean, that the property values are gonna be relatively flat. We think they're gonna be closer to about 2% increase, okay? When we get that preliminary projection, we can't use that as a base as how we calculate that revenue because there's going to be a drop from the last preliminary projection until we receive the certified estimate. So we have to take that into consideration. Now, in the previous 5 years, not considering last year, but preceding that, going back to 2016, that difference between their last preliminary number to what we got certified was about 1 to 2% drop. Okay, so variance of what they gave us before the certified rules. So, can't take that into history. The last year, it was 5.5% of a drop. So much more significant drop from what they estimated originally to the certified rolls. So to be conservative on that, I used that same methodology that I'm taking the preliminary number and dropping it by 6% to get that baseline certified roll in order to calculate what that estimated property tax will be, that we will get. So that is where that 2% variance comes from in the revenues over this time last year. Property taxes, we receive that in bulk. You know, usually at December, January timeframe when everyone's paying their taxes, that comes in. So we know year to date what we have received so far in bulk because that's already on the books, okay? We do receive delinquent taxes. So that is that second line here. And then obviously penalties and interest, and that stuff is what's coming in throughout the year, but that fluctuation is not, you know, too significant. Dallas County is the one that receives the taxes on our behalf, and their collection rate is about 99%. So we do have to discount when we look at that value and we look at that tax revenue, discount about 1% because we know we're not going to get that the first year. Essentially.
Jennifer?
Yes.
I'd like to point out to everybody, if you're going back and forth between sheets, the column here that says revised on here is our year-end projection. So even though we show you what was adopted here on the larger sheet in yellow, represents what is our end-of-year projection for each of those numbers this fiscal year.
Okay. And again, we'll begin those certified rolls at the end of July, and we will be able to solidify this number. But that, based on our preliminary projections and what we've seen, that is 2% is about what we're looking at for revenue increase. Okay? Any questions on the property tax at this point? Going into sales tax, that is our second largest revenue resource. So sales tax is 2%, right? We have 1% that is going into the general fund. We have a 1/2 cent that is going into economic development, and we have another 1/2 cent going as property tax relief. To understand what property tax relief, this was something that was voted on by the citizens in 1995, and that is so the general fund can receive a portion of that sales tax to relieve the general fund of that property tax variance, that burden there. So that is why we have extra portion of the sales tax coming into the general fund. As far as how we collect sales tax, we collect it 2 months behind, so we call it in arrears. So we will receive a payment in June, but it's for the collection month of April, okay? And so we have May through September still left to collect. Technically, that will hit the books, but how we end the year, ending the year, this year, we're seeing about a 3% increase there, and we expect going into next year to it'll be a 2% increase in total sales tax collection. And we think this is a good number because I know there's been stimulus money into the economy and people have been spending a lot, and I know that can't necessarily consider that in the future for spending habits, but we do have 3 big commercial properties coming in that should be bringing in sales tax dollars into our economy, a new employer coming down the line with the economic outlook that Gus told you about yesterday. We think this is a good number for where we will be next year. Okay?
I can't accept it.
Okay.
It appears to be much too high to me, going back into history. If we go back to 2018-19, we're looking at about 5.4.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go to
Let me
2019-20.
bring up this chart here so you can see the.
Okay, then we're going into 2019-20, we're looking at 5.1, maybe 5.2, we're in a dip. And then closing out, you're saying we're probably gonna hit maybe 5.6, and we're looking at for 2021-22, pushing almost 5.7. We have lost businesses, we've closed businesses. Businesses don't know really where they're going. Now, I know that Gus is gonna be doing aggressive action to bring more business into the city. But taking it up to nearly 5.7 million from where 2 years ago we were at 5.3, maybe 5.4, I think it's far too much a reach for us to have a budget that we can consider to be acceptable. I would like to be much more conservative with that number than being much more optimistic, which I believe this is a much too optimistic number. I'd like something more realistic that conforms to something around the 2018-19 number and increase that maybe 2% or 3%.
I like to keep hearing more before I kind of make that decision as well.
Okay, and sales tax truly can be a guessing game. You never know what, at the end of the day, how the money's going to be spent. What things you definitely can count on is the businesses that you do have here and the sales tax that is generating. Yes, we did lose, a profitable piece of our business back in this time frame right here. COVID did hit. We were at home a little more, but.
And the reason I want to hear more is I think about it now because each year, whether it was 18, 19, or 20, we wind up having an additional sales tax at the end. So we really understated it. So we wound up having more revenue than we thought we had. And so we came up at the end of the year saying, we have all of this, I won't say extra, we had all of this excessive that surplus. We did. We wasn't conservative. We was too conservative, and we had things that we could have did. For instance, when we kept looking at whether we do homestead or not homestead, had we known what the numbers looked like, we could have said homestead. So now we was too conservative back then, and that's why I said I wanted to hear more, because I really want to expand this conversation out a little bit more.
And that's why I'm mentioning, to me, this is worthy of more conversation. This is a huge piece of what we do in terms of being able to supply what goes on in the economic engine for our city. Now, where is Gus anyway?
Right here.
Oh, there you go. One of the two, in his factors yesterday, in the top 10 generators of sales tax, 2 of those were online generators with Amazon.
Right.
Now, based on that bill failing in the 87th legislature down in Austin, that bill failed in terms of putting the sales tax on the recipient versus where it's originating. Now, if those 2 items for online sales continue to benefit the city as it is, I mean, finding that in our top 10 was really remarkable to me. I didn't think it was going to hit there, but it did. So 2 out of our top 10 sales tax generators are coming online. So the only way I could accept this 5.6 pushing 5.7 is if there's some reasonable optimization that those 2 factors in our top 10, the Amazon pieces, are going to significantly generate more revenue to bring us up to this number. Now, I think all of you will probably say, how many people do you know whose shopping behaviors have shifted dramatically to online shopping. I can say without doubt, almost all of our friends are shopping online for a lot of stuff. The only thing they go to the store for is groceries, and some of them have even stopped that. But for hardware, for hard essentials, even for soft lines, most people that I know are going online. So if we can say, according to what Gus has given us, that those two top 10 factors are pushing coming out of online, then I can accept pushing the 5.7, but I'll be uncomfortable about it, okay?
So I'm not saying 5.7 is the number yet, but I want to hear more from the presentation.
So the bill failed, but the controller decided to do it anyway. So he actually controls what we get, that's the controller's report. So yes, they tried to do it through legislation, but the controller, and I'll find the information for you, actually moved forward with the sales tax process. So the legislative bill didn't go through, but he has that decision making, and so that is what occurred. And I'll get that information and bring it back to you. So that's,
So then it's even worse than I thought.
no, it's actually better.
No, because if
He's
if
giving us
what he
online.
wants, he's pushing it toward sales tax goes to the recipient.
No. He's doing what the bill didn't do. The bill was going to give it to the point of sale place. So when it comes to me, I order on Amazon. So what he has decided to do, and that's where that gray area, and why don't I get you that?
No. Because the city of Colleyville, in my speaking with that mayor and even the city manager, they were going to, as a result of that bill, going to lose up to $26 million because the sales tax was going to go to the recipient, not where the originator is.
Yes, I know the city manager of Colleyville.
But that's why I want to.
So why don't I get you, and I don't want to kind of debate something that I don't have in front of me, but in my discussions at the TCMA and the city managers conference, and I will pull up the information, is the concern is, even though the bill failed, is that the controller made a decision in some cases that those point of sales will still go there. So let's get clarity and I will bring it back to you. The second question is, how did we get to 2%? That's a great question. It wasn't without saying, we didn't just say, oh my God, let's add 2% to it. We actually looked at some actual estimates of revenue. And what we will bring to you is a list of what things we put into that estimate, including our new person that's coming on board from a sales tax standpoint. But we also had some other things that were coming on. So as we get to a proposed budget, if we are still comfortable with the 2% and bringing it back, we're going to get you a list. It's not going to be in the budget book, but we will provide council with a list of what factors and what companies and businesses that led to our estimate of about a 2% increase. So what I believe you all have asked us for is justification of how we got to that number and basically what's behind it, what's the juice behind that number, and what we'll do is bring that back to you.
Fair enough, make
Okay.
us comfortable.
Yes.
All right. So, moving on to the franchise tax. This is the third area of tax receipts that we receive. The franchise tax, start with electricity. Over the years, it's been about 1.1 million that we receive. Electricity is based on usage. Natural gas, we receive, historically, it's been about 300,000. Again, that is based on usage. We receive these receipts on a monthly basis. The telephone tax, that is your landline. Providers, still at this point, this number is dwindling down, as is landline, usage. Cable television, that is the spectrum, not spectrum, but charter spectrum. So that is the 5% of their gross receipts, and that can fluctuate based on signing on with them and their gross receipts. Because I showed the actuals here, just wanted to point out this telephone video, which is no longer a source of revenue when it comes to the franchise. 2 years ago, through Senate Bill 1192, I believe, it was removed so that the telephone providers can choose whichever is less of their franchise, so they're not double paying, so to speak. So that is no longer a resource of funding for us. But at the end of the day, for the end of the year, this is, again, our target for the franchise. Transfers in is the next source of revenues for us. We receive transfers from other funds. This is an administrative fee, so to speak, that covers the administrative support that those in the general fund give to these other funds, so with accounting, with HR, with procurement, that sort of thing. The transfer is determined is a percentage calculation based on revenue, so that's why you see it fluctuating from year to year, is the revenue from that fund is typically around 5 to 7%, and that is a GAAP standard to do this. That is the generally accepted accounting principles. Yes.
I think it needs to be understood that that $2.7 billion is a paper transaction. It's moving from one fund to another.
Right.
It's not true revenue coming into the coffers of the city.
It is helping a general fund, however, as a resource in order to pay for our expenses. And it's a part of
The generation of that income is coming from those funds, and all we're doing is making a paper transaction to accommodate the
Yes.
administration of that.
Yes.
Exactly.
So I don't
Yes.
want you to walk away thinking, well, cool, we got a $2.7 million generator here. We don't.
Yes.
This is just a paper transaction
It's
of
just
already existing
One of those
monies.
line items of revenues we account for.
Right.
Okay. The last one here is the pilot franchise tax. That does come from the utility fund, but as utility fund operates like his own business, we receive franchise like we do on electricity and gas. That's similar to what we're receiving on the utility side. That's what that pilot franchise tax is. Permits and fees. This is a pretty large area to break down. The biggest generator, well, not the biggest, the second one, I should say, is building permits. This one has fluctuated over the last couple of years due to the volume of requests for building. We have those 3 big commercial builds right now that's affecting this current year. I'm talking with Mr. Ramey, getting an idea of, is this something that's just an anomaly because we're having these builds, or is it something you have a new base perhaps? And that is where we think we will be is based on, we have a new baseline. We have more permits coming in and they have more fees that they are charging.
So remind me what happened, what was the big difference? That's the big difference from 2019 to 2021, 355 and 250. Did we have additional businesses moving in that we?
Again, 19, and we were looking at those numbers. Again, that was while everyone was staying home, we saw a lot of influx there, opportunity type, I'm gonna put a new roof, I'm going to, fence, that sort of thing. So we were collecting more in the permits as well as, kicking the commercial, sorry, that's flying here. Those 3 commercial buildings were kind of in the works, if you will. So that really is why that.
So you don't have a breakdown of that. When you looked at your estimate, did you have a breakdown of, I don't want to think that the 3 commercial have a heavier weight than the residential, or does residential have a heavier weight than the 3? Just kind of curious where they really fell.
I believe we looked at the 3 commercials because if you look at our projected end year also, it was around 300, and for building permits was about 370,000, and we adopted 250. And so small projects were one, but we have been trying to go back and see exactly what those were, and those were some large commercials. As you're aware, there's some construction going on Clark Road, which is a Chipotle. Let's get it right. And then there's other larger commercial structures going on, including the new credit union that's opening up. The reason that we're being conservative is, although we're hoping, as Gus presented, that we'll have some more things on the books, until we get a little bit more confident about what's next down the pipeline, we did not want to be aggressive. And so that's why when you see, although the adopted is 250 and the projected, and that's based on year-to-date actuals, is at 370,000, we just felt that we needed to be very conservative in this area until we know more.
Okay, thank you.
The next larger item there is the emergency medical service. That is our ambulance billing. Bringing Emergicon online, that goes into effect next month, and with their estimates of how more aggressive they are, and there is, like City of Lancaster brought them on. When was it, Chief Rhodey, are you able to speak to that? When Lancaster brought on Emergicon?
2 or 3 years ago.
2 or 3 years ago, and they saw a significant increase. Of course, the current provider that we're with, Change Healthcare, is pretty good, and so we won't realize the same amount of collections that they did, but they are really aggressive. Yes.
On this number here, this is the number that we actually get. What percentage do they charge to collect this money?
7 or 8%.
Okay, but this is solely our money we are projecting to take in.
Yes, as long as that program keeps going.
And that's-
That's a state program, and they could cut it at any time they were supposed to cut it, but they continued it on.
And that's not factored into the EMS side, it's simply our ambulance billing. That supplemental program is another line item, which
Okay.
shows here as an actual, but yes, it's not, budgeted for, because it's an unexpected,
Those-
revenue, we can't
those are
budget
two
for that.
different Two different revenues.
Yes.
And I believe that they estimated that this would result in about a 30% increase. We're not going to go that aggressive right away. So we kind of said about a 13% the first year. And if we see growth as we do mid-year amendments with council, then that would be when we would change this up. But we want to see the performance before we get too aggressive in this area.
If we were to take emergency medical service personnel costs as compared to emergency medical services revenues, what would be the net?
I wouldn't be able to tell you that off the top of my head.
Well, the reason I asked the question, it could be rhetorical, but the whole point of my question is, of this $161,000, most of it's sitting right there.
Mhm.
And all of it really is it's reimbursement of our personnel costs. So to say that, here's another one, don't get real comfortable with $161,000 in there, because offsetting that is the personnel costs in order to put this thing into service in the first place.
Our
These
advanced
rev-
life support cost for this budget cycle is about $1.6 million. And so this is not a enterprise or a revenue generating, it is a service to our citizens. So although we are capturing some of the funds back, it is just considered a service. It is not something to generate revenue.
It's a cost center. It's not a profit center, it's a cost center. If you put it in the budget analysis, it's a cost center. That's why I said, don't get real super comfortable with this money, because it's not there.
Right. We do want to point out yet, there are certain revenues, they're not growth revenues that you can count on growing like you can for sales tax. But these are revenues that we do receive and therefore we do account for.
They're just meant to offset the amount of
Yes.
services that we give in the city. So when, like she said, we don't make a profit, but the more money we get to offset the actual cost of these services is better for the city.
Well, Mayor, to your point, would it be worthwhile on those types of, that you just described, to have an asterisk on there? So as we go down there, we can see that those are not actual revenue producing.
It would be worthwhile, but that's why I'm bringing it up to, just so you know, that some of these are not pure revenue generators. Some of these are just
Yeah, I get
credits and debits, and if you put it into a ledger,
Well, this is the ledger.
I know,
And
but
these are
we're
what-
not
these
showing
are-
the other side of it.
We will get to the other
We're
side.
not showing the expense to say what's the net. If we were to do this as an operating statement, it'd have a different picture.
Well, this particular slide is not meant to show you that. It's just
I know,
meant to
but it's going-
particular revenue.
I know, but
And
what
what's
I'm doing
coming
is
in.
explaining to everybody to understand, this is not a revenue generator, it's a cost. It's a cost reimbursement to expenses, because this is a cost center, it's a service to our city, and if you wanted to put it into business terms, it's a loser,
And Mayor,
but that's okay.
respectfully, I think most of us understand.
Yes.
It's good to educate and that's the purpose of breaking this down more, so, okay. The
Well,
fines.
Greg wants to
I
say
was just
something.
gonna ask, I'm seeing you're nodding your head, so you're on.
Yes,
So I think you were suggesting that this is gonna be broken down further to address that concern.
Yes, where you will see the actual revenues and the expenditures for the general fund, all the expenditures that are gonna go against those revenues, and
There will be a summary
there'll be
at the
a
end.
summary.
And to Mr. McBurnett's point, maybe we all understand it, but the people out there watching may not. And that's
But I
why
do- I
we're
do-
obligated to make comments.
I do want to make sure we mention that this is right now the city's manager's budget, so it's not turned over to us yet. So though we're making comments, it is still the city manager's budget in their hands at this point. So that's why I'm saying we need to, we may have questions, but let's listen to it all the way through. But it is not our budget as council yet, it's the city manager's budget.
So municipal court fines, with, COVID and everything, we weren't collecting as much, we weren't issuing as many citations. Now, what we are proposing here, the numbers that we put in place, we went back to 17-18 numbers and used that as a baseline for our court and fines. So it looks a variance here, because of course we're comparing it to the adopted, but again, we are targeting going back to 2018 as kind of a baseline for those revenues. Another resource here is the investment income. And as we have presented before, that the interest rates are very low right now, so we're not receiving much revenue from that resource as we have in the past. Recreational fees, this is again the memberships and the building rentals of our facilities. We are using, going back to 2017, 2018 numbers as our baseline for what we're putting into the proposed. And that is because in those years, obviously pre-COVID time, as a good base for where we will be next year. The other revenue category, this is everything else that we collect. Again, these are not a revenue generator source of revenues here, but we want to at least break it down for you so you know what's captured here. We have the alcoholic beverage tax. That is a mixed beverage tax that's paid by the Texas Comptroller on gross receipts. Being that people can take alcohol to go now, and I believe that will continue on into the future, that we actually might see that revenue go up. So, but we are, again, targeting pre-COVID as our baseline for our targeted revenue there. We do receive some reimbursements that are offset of our expenses here as well. Crossing guards, we get a 50% reimbursement from the school district, and we also get a reimbursement from the county for the crossing guard fee when you go pay for your title for your car or registration of your car. There's a fee added on there. We get that money. We get a reimbursement for the regional emergency manager because we're in that with the Best Southwest. They share our regional emergency manager and they reimburse us a quarter of her cost. And so that's that number there. City services reimbursement, that is like our mowing liens. That's the money we get from those things. Workers' compensation reimbursement, that is just depending on if we have folks that are out on workers' comp and they have to turn, since we pay them their full salary, they reimburse us the temporary income that they get from the workers' comp provider. Cell tower site rentals, that's again the cellular towers rental on our facilities. And the all other miscellaneous category, just wanted to group because there's just too many smaller nominal amounts there. But that would be like the copies and police reports and
They're on your sheets
yeah,
here.
they're on that
They're on
little
the
sheet.
sheets
They're
here.
broken out, but they're just really small amounts. I did not want to break them out here. But again, those are not a revenue generating type resource, revenue, excuse me. So that's all other revenue. So that is it on the revenues for the general fund. I'm going to walk you through all the revenues, by the way, first before we get to the expenses. So I'm just diving right on into the utility fund. Okay. As far as the utility fund, the water revenues, sewer revenues, this is not without anything like that, but we are projecting over adopted. Again, this number is based on the adopted receiving. Kind of back to pre-COVID levels when we don't have the cutoffs and all of that factoring into our revenues here. The other revenues down, again, that has to do with income, the investments, interest, that sort of thing. I didn't break them down here, but water revenues, sewer revenues, they are broken out by residential versus commercial versus multifamily, things like that. So, and just for your sake, you know that there are 4 billing cycles that we collect every month. Solid waste, this is your garbage, your landfill collection fees. We're not projecting an increase in our collections at this point. Drainage, that's your stormwater fees. Again, we are now we have the stormwater fees that we implemented a couple of years ago. We are now receiving that full amount for those non-residential properties. And so we're capturing that here. For our education, again, we collect the stormwater fees in our utility bill. You see it as a line item on your utility bill, $3.50. For all other customers, there is a calculation that determines what it is that they owe based on their equivalent residential unit. Other revenues here is just investment income. And there is another that we do put in here. Or we do have bag wall projects that come up from year to year, and that is where the city goes 50-50 with a citizen that wants to invest in getting bag wall erosion put in on their property. So we do get a reimbursement of a part of that project. So we do account for it here, but of course it's based on if a project is actually occurring, which we usually have one every year. And these fees cover the bag wall and other CIP projects relating to drainage, including part of the alley reconstruction. It goes to drainage.
Explain that part, once again, the,
Non-residential,
no, the equivalent residential, I'm sorry.
yeah,
Other revenue includes investment income.
all of our funds, we do invest a portion of those funds into, CDs or money markets, those sort of
That's
things.
just interest,
Yeah, it's
income
the
off of
interest.
your cash in the bank, your investments that we have. That's just the interest that we record get from those funds.
Okay, and so somewhere down the road, we'll get to see what that actual number is?
Oh, absolutely. For the actual
Not
interest,
for it.
It's included in the other revenue line, and it's very small, so I didn't break it out here. But it's captured within the other revenue. I think it's like $100 is what we budgeted, it's very small. But I didn't necessarily break it out line items here.
it's not large enough to break out.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You might want to get a back brief from Greg on what that whole process, it was a major change for us in the city in terms of assessing fees for stormwater on commercial properties.
Yes.
And that's where this is coming from, Greg, so, offline, I want to talk to Greg about that. It explains it in great detail, and we went over it, like, how many meetings did it take us to understand what was going on? About 2 or 3 meetings before we actually got it.
I've been involved in a lot of bag wall talk, but never the financial side. So,
No, not bag wall. No, this is impervious land, runoff from impervious land.
Yeah, the impervious is what's calculated within the actual collection of the fees, and that's for non-residential properties.
okay, what's the reference here to bag wall reimbursement then?
But we do, the city,
That's
we
secondary.
do get a reimbursement for going 50-50 with citizens who,
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So it's a reimbursement, reimbursement. Okay, so now at the Fieldhouse, when we went into FY '21 adopted, of course, we were still in COVID, and so we did revise that, we did project those fees lower than, say, a pre-COVID period. These numbers here are up to pre-COVID levels, and what we anticipate with all the tournaments and all of the activities and programs that they're doing down there. We do break out various revenues here, such as sponsorships and the food and beverage. The patio is going in quite nicely, if you haven't driven down there and see it, but they are nearly done with that construction. You have a general store, court facility, rentals, basketball rentals, camp after-school programs. So the total revenue is $261,000 more than what we originally adopted.
What's the classes that's kind of double that amount? What kind of classes are we talking about?
Art, would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, they have various fitness programs and things that are in the back that are run by third-party groups, and that money is collected and put into that category.
So does you estimate that being 63 over 30? Any justification on making it from 30 to 63?
Well, we
10%?
we do have a large increase in the number of dance classes and as well as boxing.
All right, thank you.
And I just want to highlight though, as we see the bottom line here of the proposal, we are in line. Our FY19 actuals actually came to 1.34 million, so.
Of course, that was stood out because of the 110%. Okay. All right.
Okay.
If you go back to the pre-COVID levels, and that's pretty much what it was.
Okay, thank you.
Economic development, as we were talking about sales tax with our projected 2% increase, of course that impacts this fund as well, since a half cent goes into this fund. Again, interest income is very nominal. Just as an overview of what the economic development fund is, we adopted this in 1995. It is a type B sales tax, which means it's a developing industry and cultivating communities. The Texas Comptroller has a lot of good information about what goes into that 4B type of institution there. It is a special use fund, so it is very specific on how we can spend these revenues that come in, very specific to economic development and programs and such. That's supposed to be my expense. We receive, again, just a sales tax, we receive that 2 months in behind, in the rears. Hotel Motel, occupancy tax. We receive 7% from the local hotels for their occupancy. We receive this monthly. Okay, currently we have 8 motels that we have in our city. These funds, the revenues are restricted, our expenses are restricted to these 2 criteria here. We can spend it on items that directly promote tourism and convention hotel industry, that heads and beds concept, and it has to meet criteria number 2, which there are 9 different categories that we can plug in eligible expenses that we can use these revenues for. And just as a note, 15% is our limitation what we can spend on the promotion of art, such as the theater and things like that. So that's it for.
Can you
all
go
of
back
those.
on the last one?
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things I want to highlight on, on Hotel Motel is that if you see we've gone down, we actually estimated at the level in which it's been under our revised budget. So although we adopted the 755, we projected at the end of the fiscal year, as you, in the earlier you will have seen at 734. And so we're staying in line with that, looking at our hotels. We want to be cautious on it. We're hoping things will pick up as our economic development stuff picks up. But we also know that we all had some anomalies. We didn't lose a lot, but we had an ice storm. And during that ice storm, that took away some revenue, and every dollar counts when we look at it. And so one of the big priorities that Mr. Gus, he must have stepped out, also has been focusing on is how can we bring in an additional hotel? And so he has actually been in talks with some individuals who would like to locate another hotel here. And that would be a nice family type that will support our sporting events and our hotel motel.
So, Ms. Benavides, many citizens will argue that we have too many hotels. So if that's the case, would you go slide back, one more slide, and for those citizens that's listening, really talk a little bit more why we talk about having hotels in the city.
Now
Many will say that we have too many hotels, it's enough hotels, but would you share with citizens that's listening why we, in some cases, have hotels in the city?
Well, obviously, when you have events for different activities like our GASO, which is one of the events we have coming up in the next week or so, we know that we have approximately 534,000 visitors annually to that GASO facility.
How many?
534,000 visitors annually. Now,
To the Fieldhouse.
we have to the Fieldhouse. Approximately 34,000 of those visitors fly in through DFW Airport. So we know that through a software program called Placer AI, which is going to be in my budget this year. But we know that we get a significant number of visitors, and those visitors obviously are going to look for the closest place to stay to whatever venue they're attending. So just by that, those numbers alone, 34,000 visitors, obviously they don't all stay in Duncanville. They stay at different parts of Dallas because there's different attractions for each one of those events. I mean, Dallas is a big city and there's a lot going on. But certainly with a total of 675 rooms, not all of them being, 3.5 stars or above, there's probably maybe half of those at 3.5 stars or above. Certainly there would be a need for hotels in our community. So Hotel Motel has a significant amount of revenues for those 3.5 stars. Yes, sir, sorry.
Outside of that large event, the GASO event, what happens to those hotels when we don't have those large events?
Well, they're located off of the freeways, so they provide easy access to anything that might be going on in Fort Worth, Dallas. We're 15 miles.
So you feel comfortable their occupancy would still stay?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, you saw the numbers yesterday. So in spite of that, even on the lower end hotels, you saw an average, not a median. So you still saw a decent average daily revenue, or RevPAR. And then you also saw about a 61% occupancy rate in the last 12 months. And that's in the pandemic or coming out of the pandemic. So I would think that you would have an increase in the average amount of occupancy.
So not to get too far off track, my last question. In that same amount of area that a hotel would take, let's say you could get 2 national restaurants. Which one we like better?
I'm sorry, that's a loaded question. So could you be more specific?
We can talk about that
Some of them are
later.
tied to hotels, and so when you start to recruit some family-style type restaurants, they will only locate next to a hotel off of an interstate, and some that we've talked about will only locate off an interstate connected to a hotel. And so that also will be of value to us.
Thank you.
I mean, the Texas Leading Index, which is based on 8 economic indicators, has consistently since 2017, which is a predictor. Statistically, it trends prior to what actually happens, has trended around, and I want to say 5 to 6% annually. And Texas, right now, the TLI, what we call the TLI, Texas Leading Index, which is based on construction, employment, unemployment, based on production. Right now, we're trending at about 10.9%. Right now, which again, it's a predictor. So statistically, it's going to tell you where we're going to be in some of those indicators. And so it has consistently been between 5 and 6%, and that affects sales tax. Also affects construction, et cetera. I'd be happy to provide that for you.
I'll also say that hotels, in addition to hotel motel taxes, also pay property taxes and our water and sewer customers.
That's correct. Now, I'm right now in discussions with the developer that has a hotel operator that wants to come in, and it's a 3.5 star or above. And it's geared specifically towards a certain type of resident that I think would bode well for the economy, and we don't have one of those. And they do a significant amount of studies, and it's a very large flag. I don't want to state the flag right now, but they want to come into Duncanville on one of our properties. So they do an extensive amount of studies, so that in itself kind of coincides with what I'm saying, or what we're saying, I should say.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing.
And another point is, to the positive, is that we reside on the interstate, or M67 and 20, and we're a gateway to Arlington, and we're a gateway to Dallas.
I was about to say that, sir.
Well, if that's the case, don't make me say, that's exactly why I question what things we put on 67 and 20 that does not line up with businesses that we need to be on 20 and 67. So, but I will say that. So that's why I'm very cautious of what's on 67 and 20, simply because it is a gateway to our city, and we can't have our city gateway looking like it's nothing. So, just extra.
Okay. So that concludes our revenue portion. Now we're gonna dive into the expenditures.
Okay. Great. Just as a kickoff to the expenditures, one of the processes we do is, and we'll get to it at the end, is we go through scenarios. So as we start to prepare, we develop a baseline based on where we are in this fiscal year. And then we go into what are the things that we have to do, want to do, need to do, and all the other things. But at the first level you're going to see today is a baseline. One of the things that you're going to see included in our baseline, you go to the first one, is in talking, and as we start to look at our surrounding communities, we looked at a 2% salary increase for staff. And why was that decision made? As we talk to our partners and as we are competing, they are ranging from 3 to 4%. And so at a moderate level, we were recommending that. The other thing that is included in this baseline is we are fortunate, unlike many people, is that we have received a 1.1% decrease in our healthcare cost. That is a huge accomplishment for our city. And I think that will also help, as you'll see, to augment some of the other costs. And so we're not reducing or recommending the reduction of the employees' payment into the healthcare, but we are recommending a 2% cost of living increase, and we have it included in the baseline you're going to see.
Just to highlight again, when we go through all of the funds, especially ones that have employees in there, you will see, I'm not going to go through every single line item of that increase, but you will see an impact from the 2% salary increase. Also, we are recommending increasing our fleet replacement contributions. We had been at 40% of what they should be, but and I'll be touching on that when we get to that fund. But based on where that fund balance is, we are increasing those contributions to 70%, which will explain some of the variance here, as well as IT replacement contributions. We increased that to 100%. Previously, it was at 80%.
And can I say, as the mayor would often say, this is an area where we're just putting the money aside to save for later. This is not a payment out. in this fund, the contribution. And so it is how we create a savings account so that when we're ready to do replacement, we have funds available, as the same with IT, which is a fabulous practice of the city.
Pay as you go.
Pay as you go.
Pay cash. So on the general fund side, just wanted to break down that we do have 6 different departments that we do categorize. We have the general government, finance, parks, recreation, police, public works, and fire. Those 6 departments do account for the general fund employees and services. To break down here in the pie chart by department, as you'll see, police, they always have the biggest chunk of the pie, followed by fire, and then the public works, and then finance, and parks and recreation, and general government, non-departmental activities, but that's how the pie breakdown looks. And just so you can see it from a different perspective, I also broke it down. Sorry?
Does that include, we talked earlier in the year about increasing staff.
You're gonna see that in here.
Okay, good deal,
We'll
thank you.
talk. We have some, and what I should have said is, at the end, I'm gonna talk about the scenarios in general. But there are some priorities that you've already given me that are included in our baseline. I get a chance, once you see the baseline and we look at the numbers, to sit down with staff, to listen to you, and try to account for some of the scenarios in which they have recommended in the budget for other funding sources. And I'll give you an overview of what that is.
And I want to clear that up, I want to just mean staff, I meant police.
It's in there.
Okay, thank you.
I also wanted to break down the general fund by expense type. We don't typically see it broken down this way, but I wanted to show you how that breaks down. So salary and benefits, that's going to be your largest portion of the budget, because we are a service organization. We can't do what we do without the people. You have supplies, that is usually, your office supplies, miscellaneous supplies, your direct materials, buying cabinet parts to replace the traffic, buying concrete mix, things like that for your projects. We have services and maintenance, that's where the contractual services lie, and doing all the maintenance, ground maintenance and building maintenance, things like that. The internal funds, that's what I call the fleet replacements, the IT replacements, and also the comprehensive liability and workers' comp insurance fund that we have that pays out those claims that we get from time to time. Those are the contributions and premium payments we make into that fund.
So going back to that other slide where we're going to fleet going to 70 and IT going to 100, what portion of that 1.3 million is the accrual accounts versus the actual income or expenditures?
You're talking about in the contributions?
Yep.
The expenditures happen in the replacement fund itself. All that's happening here is we're paying that savings, if you will, transferring it out from the different cost centers into that fund to pay cash when those things are due. So we're not paying for it here, we're just paying putting that money aside into it.
You mentioned a couple other categories of expense that were not the IT and the fleet. That's what I'm at. If we were to break out that 1.3 million, taking away the safety accrual accounts of IT and fleet, what portion would be left over? Do you have any idea?
I can't answer that off the top of my head.
Okay.
I can get back with you on that one. But again, this right here.
But that's it. I mean, that's the number.
That is it. That's all I've, that's in this account. It's also the premiums for the insurance.
See, that's the other pieces of it that I'm looking at. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Okay, and then we also have a capital. This is not your CIP stuff, but this is, things that are over 5,000 that we have to capitalize out of that account. And this is how it breaks down overall. Salaries, benefits, get 64% of the pie. And then your service and maintenance, contractual, things like that, get the 26% and all of the other areas there. Okay, so starting in general government, we have various cost centers here. I've also included the position count so you can see how many full-time equivalents are within that particular cost center. We have, the mayor and council here. City administration, we've had some changes here, primarily due just with staffing changes and people transferring people into it. And
we, in this area, tell us the administration, in city administration, for example, one of the two things, we moved the city marshal under the assistant city manager. We also moved Jennifer out of finance into the city administration, as well as adding in the executive assistant for the city manager.
Yes. And you'll see a variance here because we have moved the city secretary's office back out. It was previously under the city administration umbrella. Now she's back to her own separate office there, so that's some variance there. Human resources.
That's Kristen in Kansas.
Yes.
That's Kristen Kansas. Human resources, that's 2.5 full-time equivalents, 2 full-times, and we have interns that come. IT, they have 4 individuals there. Public information, he's an office of 1. We have the library services, 12 full-time equivalents. Again, the city marshal is just 1, and the non-departmental, we do not have any employees there. Other than the salary increases and the contribution increases, some increases too here, you have the election expenses. Dallas County increased their fees. We've increased IT maintenance and subscription, that is to keep our city safe, and all the necessary subscriptions that we have to in order to keep up our domains and things like that. The retiree medical subsidy, and we talked about that, we just have less participation on the retirees. That is something that's housed within the non-departmental since we no longer have that separate fund. As Ms. Aretha already said, we have 2 positions that have relocated into general government, as well as the new position of the executive assistant. I'm sorry that it cut off there, but that's pretty much.
Where is that executive assistant showing on this chart?
It would be here.
City administration.
Yeah, we have
City
it currently.
administration.
It's a,
So we've hired somebody, put in a new position, we're paying that person X number of dollars, but the number goes down.
Because we moved Kristen and Kapi.
yes.
So about 2-3 years ago, the previous city manager made a decision to move the city secretary out of a separate funding line and consolidating it up to city administration. I, as city manager, earlier this year asked that the finance director remove it and list that as a separate department as it was in the past, or separate office under general government.
So for whom does this executive assistant serve?
Me,
You.
yes.
What about Gus's?
Gus has one, yes.
And you feel you need an executive assistant?
I absolutely do.
Why?
Because, for example,
Mayor, I don't think that's appropriate right now. I think that's something we need to.
This is, you wanna ask how much this person costs, and we're in the budget then. This is budget.
But the question you're asking is asking her why she needs one. I mean, name one topic.
If she can't justify why she needs one, then we as a council need to understand how much we're gonna be paying this person in terms of budgeting for that.
Name one top executive or CEO company that does not have administrative assistant or executive assistant.
That's not the point.
That is the point.
No, it is not the point. We have not had an executive assistant to the city manager for as long as I've known, and all of a sudden we do. So I think it's a fair question to ask why, because we as a council have to pay for it.
I don't think it's a fair question that we asked her directly like.
And I do think it's a fair question.
Okay.
But is that a question that we need to discuss today, because we're gonna have future meetings where we're gonna be getting it more into the meat of things? Is it better not serve that we have that discussion
As
then?
long as I get an answer on why this individual is necessary for X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars, whatever it's gonna cost, we gotta pay for this person.
But we'll get that
We have to
answer,
budget for this person,
we'll get that answer with plenty of time to make our decision based on what the answer is.
as long as we get it, Patrick.
So, Opal at the city of Lancaster has an executive assistant. I'm just asking. I forget the guy's name at DeSoto.
Brandon.
He
Brandon,
has
right.
2 executive assistants. And Cedar Hill, his name is Greg, I know he has at least 1. And so it seems to me that we, for some reason, have not made ourselves comparable to other cities in this particular regard. And so it seems to me that it's long overdue that our chief administrator have an executive assistant, just like the surrounding cities do.
And I'll add to that comment, and that would be in the past, I believe that the city secretary probably served as that executive assistant and the role of city secretary.
Correct.
And if that's the case, that's an overload of the city secretary and outside of what I consider to be their duties of the city secretary.
So you have adequately answered the question for my question to the city manager,
Okay.
which I wanted an answer to in the first place. You said I shouldn't be asking
Then
for
you
it.
got it, okay.
So now
Well,
you're giving it to me.
just the way you approached that question, Mayor, was a
Why do you
Okay,
need one?
we got an answer, we can move, I'm finished. We got the answer.
Moving on to finance, from the world of finance. Finance administration here, you'll see that variance is because moving my position out and putting it under the general government. And plus, we've decided not to fill the assistant finance director position currently to be able to allocate that to another area of need would be in procurement. We are proposing to add a position to support procurement. And so we are reallocating those funds. And that's pretty much what you see here is the variance in finance. Again, city marshal was moved under the general government umbrella, so.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Did we just look at IT a moment ago?
Mhm.
Yeah, so.
Yes, please.
So, last year, we approved an additional position, for IT department and,
Cybersecurity.
okay, well, I was just gonna ask the IT guy how he was doing, but I don't see him here.
New person has started,
Mm-hmm.
and today, his answer to me is he's wonderful. He's doing a lot of stuff and giving the help. During COVID, the funding that we had from the CARES was used for automation in some areas. And so they've taken on a lot from the Munis system to the new utility billing system and the things that they're uploading. And so it's amazing that 4 people are doing what they're doing, and it's been a great help and turnaround and support for them. And so the gentleman has started, and I know he's here somewhere, but he's been very happy with his performance.
All right.
Speaking, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and then I'm done. You know, occasionally, as we move through this process, the things that we approved in the budget for this year, if we could just get a brief follow-up as to, how it's working for us, as Dr. Field would say.
Yes.
I did notice on the city, we added the city marshal, did we just add that?
What we
Deputy
did
city
last year, what we did this year is that it's been a hard field position. There were 2 city marshals in the past, and I know there's Chief Brown. Chief Brown and I have been looking at it, and the city marshal, we never filled. We had 1 position. We reduced the other position to a part-time position, which made it very difficult to fill. One of the scenarios that has been requested by Chief Brown is that part-time would become full-time. But for this fiscal year, we believe that we would not be able to recruit that position this fiscal year. And rather than list it and even going out there and continuing to say the part-time is going to happen, we've just eliminated in our revenue projections for the end of the year.
Again, and let me reiterate again about the positions, even though we have vacancies that we know about, we do budget as full staff. Okay.
Go back. So Sheila Baker is our procurement person.
Yes.
So is it a reclassification, or was it the actual elimination? We just gave her a new title or a new classification? What is this person?
This is an additional person as a buyer. One of the struggles we've had, and Ms. Baker's here now.
Excuse me.
And Ms. Baker has, I'm not saying that Greg and some of our folks have a lot of things. We're trying to become more thorough. One of the things that our city attorney identified is that we've got to do check and recheck of all the things we do. But as we're moving through our purchasing process, we believe that there is a need for additional help, specifically with our capital projects that are coming online, because that is a procurement function. And so we're doing someone who is going to be a contract specialist that will work with Ms. Baker to focus. Okay. I'm sorry, to focus on providing increased services to our city departments. A lot of what you'll see and what we're hoping to do is have someone who specializes in things that are happening from a public works standpoint. Our streets buying power. Many times you ask us when you look at our contracts and we have a checklist and we have to check and recheck, because little things that happen can cause problems. For example, not verifying and getting your forms filled out to find out names. and making sure that that person doesn't have a conflict of interest. Those are the things that she does on a day-to-day basis, and when you talk to her and you hear a lot, you'll hear it's in procurement. The other thing that we focused on is, and with Ms. Baker, if she goes on vacation and she goes on a cruise for 2 weeks, there's no one to fill in for that position, and the show must go on. And so we're trying to create some redundancy, but we do think we have enough going on in procurement that justifies that we need to have at least another person at a lower level in that role.
Are they laterally classified, or is this new
It's a
person
lower level.
subordinate to?
Yes, subordinate.
Subordinate to,
Yes.
okay.
So, let me know if I'm jumping ahead
Sure,
too
sure.
much, and that would be, at the end of the day, are we increasing the total FTE count, or are we staying at the same?
We're increasing it.
Increasing?
Officially, we're increasing it. You mean in procurement?
No,
Or-
overall.
As a total.
Overall.
I haven't gotten to that point yet, and the reason I say this to you is, this is not my proposed budget. This is my preliminary estimates baseline. So at the end, you're gonna hear me talk about my scenarios. I have requests from many of my departments for additional FTEs. None of those decisions have been made until I come firm with my revenues, so I'll figure out if I have funding to support them. What we said, and I think when we talked earlier about our revenue projections, one of the concerns was, as we say, we gotta be conservative. And so although there are new positions that are necessary and that we want, we may not be able to fund them this fiscal year. So I'm holding off putting anything too much in the baseline. There are some, but I don't wanna move too fast until I know for sure the revenues are where they are. And I will be having the discussion with the staff, I believe it's next week to finalize that part for my official submittal of my proposed budget to council.
And Mayor and Council, I would also add that one of our priorities is how can we improve internal and external customer service? And so when we begin to look at those budget supplements, our priority is going to be how can we improve internal and external customer service?
So though I can agree with it at the end, the end results of improvement overall, I really am anxious to hear more about if we're increasing the overall FTE count, because I would really have questions on that end if we get to that point. So
I will tell you that based on the scenarios I've seen thus far, absolutely, there will be an increase.
by 1, 2, 3.
I don't know how many, but we start out with, we got 2 in fire, 2 in police. I think there's a fire inspector. There are some there that some have been included, some will be included by next week by the time you get the proposed budget. But what I will guarantee to each of you is that as we get to it, I will bring you down a feedback of where they're coming. We're not growing at large, but we know that we need some more people in public works. We know that I think parks need some others. And so we're working with the team to figure out, is it what you really, really need, or is it what you need now or later? And we're all trying to chip in to see what we can do.
So I think I heard you say that at the end of the day, at the end, you're going to have a breakdown of
Yes,
what
sir.
area they're
Oh,
going
absolutely.
into. Okay, all right, thank you.
Joe?
Yes, sir. Piggyback off what city manager said, and a lot on the campaign trail and just constituents in general is customer service. And so I think if, city manager needs to add a couple of folks to help increase that level of service, I think we need to try to back her up on that if the budget allows, I agree. But I appreciate you trying, because yes, I heard a lot about that on the campaign trail. It beat me up pretty good about it. And so it's a good time to bring it up. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Not seeing any bruises that you got here?
Yeah, Greg?
We've heard recently about one position that may or may not be filled in finance. Are there any other positions that are going to be done away with?
I'm not proposing at this time to do away with any others.
What generally happens is there are positions that are being reclassified or requests for reclassifications. Someone retired, they're classifying it down. And so we're looking at continuity of operation throughout. And as you mentioned, customer service. One thing that is a scenario that, when I get to that, I'll even mention it, is I'm looking to have a part-time receptionist. The center area, people come and they're standing in the atrium trying to figure out where to go. And as you all keep saying, no one answers phones. And so I'm looking, and part-time gives us a little bit of an advantage because there are retirees who are interested who would be willing. Volunteers, the issue is you get a little careful with what you can and cannot do with volunteer employees. But having someone, if I can use an example of, I love when I go to Cedar Hill, there's a woman there and she'll give you a card and her card says, I'm the face of Cedar Hill. What can I help you with? That is so important to our residents, is when they come to have someone who they can ask a question to and not walk around, or someone when you call on the phone and finally you actually hear a voice. And so I'm an old-fashioned person. I love automated things, but in this case, I know that there's nothing more important to our residents than to pick up the phone and hear a voice.
I am going to side with the expressions from Councilmember Veracruz. I mean, I've spent my career working with numbers. However, I do see myself as trying to be responsible and accountable to the people that elected me. So I want to hear how changes will directly impact their perception of how we serve them. And if we can get that, then whatever numbers it takes to get that, I think people will be fine with, because they can see what they're getting in exchange for that number.
Moving on to Parks and Recreation.
You know, one more thing.
I'm sorry.
I forgot to add one thing on my deal. It's last night at the briefing. This is the third year I've heard that we're at minimal, I'll call it minimal staffing, or lean staffing, and that's not sustainable. I mean, not this third year that I've heard it, and I know some of you have been here longer than I have, and so, I mean, how long are we gonna let them, work that way? That's just my thoughts, comment. Thank you.
Going into Parks and Recreation, we have several departments here. Administration, the rec center, operating the rec center. Special events is its own line item here. Athletic program, that's one of those areas that she just mentioned about having, when people leave a position, is our opportunity to look at, reclassification if it's necessary. That is one area we reclassified a position once a tenured employee left. In the Parks and Ground division, this main variance here has to do with the onboard of the landscaping maintenance of US 67, that green ribbon project. That estimation of keeping that landscaping up to date, projecting 107,000 increase there. So that explains, I think.
Yes.
Be ashamed to get a real nice project like that, and 2 years later you can't tell.
Yeah, true, and I guess that wasn't my hesitation. My hesitation was more around, did we, I thought we had planned for that already when we put when we did the overall project.
Well, keep in mind, a lot of that is also the mowing. We've never mowed 67 before. We'll take over the mowing as well. So that was always done by the state, 2-3 times a year. Now we'll be doing the cycles like we do on I-20. So majority of that $107,000 is mowing 67.
Yeah, not questioning it at all, but just asking.
That's actually important details to add to it. So if it's mowing, that goes beyond just the landscaping. One of the number one right-arounds that I have with council and economic development is that the state just was not doing what we need them to do in a timely fashion on our mowing projects. And so for us to, and some other cities have done that, I have heard, is to take over making sure 67 stays cut and consistently. I think that's an important investment. So it's beyond just that part. So that we'll make sure we add that note. And for our residents, so they'll know that it's not just the spot, it's actually the grass and everything. So.
And another note, talking about lean staffing again, this is definitely an area of need and something that will be proposed in the scenario of possible new skilled maintenance that could help with that area. And,
So it's not third-party contracting, it's gonna be our own people?
with the maintenance part in the landscape.
The mowing is done by a third party, and our staff does some of the on the maintenance of the landscaping.
Irrigation.
Irrigation for sure. Irrigation's a big one.
Mr. Hamilton, would you like to?
Yes,
If I may, part of it is our irrigation department has stayed pretty much the same as far as staffing wise, and as we add so much more drip, because the state requires drip on state highways for many reasons, that requires a lot of maintenance. And so it's kind of gotten to that point where now we've grown enough between I-20 and now 67's green ribbon that we really need to try to add that third irrigator position.
okay.
But who's taking care of the one on 20, by the way?
That is, the contractor takes care of the beds, but as far as the irrigation, we handle the irrigation part
Okay, so the beds are taken care of by the contractor.
by the contractor, yes, sir.
Do we check on them from time to time?
We do, yes, sir.
Because when I drive by, I'm just looking. I didn't think it was.
Now, we have had some issues, definitely due to Winter Storm Uri as well. Has taken a knock on a lot of our perennials. And those plantings are perennial heavy, as we are planning on Highway 67 as well.
So the 67 crew, this 107, it won't, it's only for 67, it won't coincide with 20.
That's about what we spend on I-20. So we're considering that they're gonna be pretty equal
They'll match up
in cost. And
Will it
so,
match up in beautification?
yes, it would be,
Yes.
67 might be better even, because it's gonna also have monument signs as well. But I'm sorry.
That's mine.
Right. Well, part of it's because it's green ribbon funding as well, and so that's the other part of it. Green ribbon funding, they give you all that money up front, but then the other part of it is you have to maintain it.
All right, good, thanks.
There's also economic development component for it. It is under beautification. There can be, as we look at the cost, funding that can come from economic development to support it, because this is considered part of what helps to promote our city. And so as we go back and look at these numbers, and Gus and I had already talked a little bit about wanting to invest some more in the beautification efforts out of the ED's Economic Development Fund, I think we may be able to supplement this some more.
Okay, heading on into police, our biggest cost center expense. Something you'll definitely note, and that looks very scary, is that variance in the police administration. And what is, that variance is due to, we are moving the Tri-City jail costs that we had a detention officer line item, and that's gone away since we don't have the jail anymore. We have moved that contract up into police administration. Additionally, we have moved the regional dispatch. We used to record it in records that housed that expense. We have moved it up to police administration, so that's where you see that crazy variance. But the net here of an increase, department as a whole, is $305,000. There are some one-time costs in here. The police chief search is a one-time estimate for that police chief search. We're increasing our duty practice ammo, and the Tri-City Jail, the second year cost to us has increased, so now that obligation is $310,000. It was $270,000 going into it the first year, and it increased to $310,000 into the second and third year.
And I apologize because I thought it was already in here, but I have it in my top list of my scenarios. My 2 additional officers are actually there, so I do have the cost, everything ready to load that into this number, so. Yes.
Then Jennifer, I didn't.
Following that, sorry.
No, that first line.
Yes.
It did not follow completely where that $1.3 million variance is coming from.
I had moved, okay, the Tri-City Jail that we pay the city of DeSoto now
Right.
was located in this detention service area. And as you see, $270,000, that was the first year cost.
So that's a
Now I
zero.
moved it up here, this has gone away, we don't need to track that cost.
That's
That's been moved up to police admin.
Okay.
The dispatch that we pay for
Right.
regional dispatch, that has been in the records line. Typically is where we paid it, but we feel it'd be better to cost for it or pay for it out of the police administration line. So that is that variance, in addition to one-time cost of a police chief.
So just historically, it was in records, because when dispatch was here years ago, it was a records function, more tied to records than police administration. So now that it's getting paid to another entity, they just moved to police administration.
So these are paper transactions.
Yes, it's not a net
Not
an
net
increase
expense,
per se,
right,
yes,
okay.
it's just moving the money
All right,
around.
And I'm sorry, help me with the contract really quickly again,
Sure.
that we moved from the jail to the Southern.
Mhm.
I thought that I know that it was gonna go up, but have we been there a year yet?
Yes, this will be going into our second year.
Do you want to speak?
And so the second year, we'd already estimated that the second year was gonna be more,
Yeah, so it was a 3-year contract.
right?
The first year was 270, and the subsequent 2 years after that were at 310.
And actually, we are currently paying less than the other cities because we negotiated that contract.
Okay. All right, thank you.
We give them a box of ammo.
All right, thank you,
All
sorry.
right, getting into public works, I mean, that's our engineering, our building inspections, streets, traffic. Some of the cost variances here, we're spending less and proposing less in our direct materials, and it's offset by the salary and fleet contributions that are increasing it. Traffic operations, we have a contract for long line paint striping that is higher than what it has been in the past. The planning, because again, these numbers are based on the adopted budget. We had a third-party planner, and so this, counts for having the person full-time on staff. Back to when we had Chastity here. And then equipment services, we are projecting a higher cost in fuel at this time.
And I'm sorry, I have to go back one more time on the
Sure.
police just for a second. Would you tell us, more so for citizens that's listening, how much money we save by moving, and the chief, how much money we save, chief, by moving our existing jail to the DeSoto jail? Because if that's going up to 370, I think you said? Did we save, how much money did we save by moving it?
I don't have that number right off the top of my head, but keep in mind, we had to pay our PSOs, our public service officers, and that's where a great deal of our expense went. We had salaries and benefits for the people who actually operated that jail, and so that has gone away. So now we just have the cost that we negotiated with the city of DeSoto to house our prisoners. And so the primary savings is gonna come from the salaries and benefits from the operation of the jail. And then we don't have all the supplies, et cetera, because that space is no longer being occupied.
Okay, thank you, sorry for having to back up.
No, that's right.
Last year, I'm sorry, go ahead. No. Last year, when we briefed the council, we estimated about $80,000 to $90,000 as a savings.
Okay.
I have not looked at the court's budget and how that's panned out for the magistrates, but I spoke with ACM recently, and that has decreased as expected because they weren't having to see the folks in our jail, and that was already embedded in the cost of what we were doing in DeSoto. So between what the ACM just mentioned and the lower magistrate costs, then that's what we estimated.
Okay.
Now, that will go up with the cost leveling off at the other city's cost as we go into years 2 and 3.
Thank you, sorry for having to back up.
So public works, again, the main components here has to do with salary increases and has to do with contribution increases to the fleet fund. That is the main variance here. Fire, really the only, other than, again, fleet contributions and salary increases, the only increase there that we're capturing is increase in the price of drugs. And then also our EMS billing fees.
And this is an area that we have scenarios that we're working through, and we're gonna sit down with fire to talk about which of the scenarios. And as you heard last night, there is a need for increased inspections, and that's one of the scenarios I'm recommending pushing forward to add an additional fire inspector to assist with it. I think if anything that's very important for us to remember when it comes to both building inspections and fire inspections, a lesson learned from what's happened in Florida is that we have to be careful. And so I believe that it's important to provide adequate staffing in those areas.
So in summary, before I say in summary, the transfers, talk about that. The biggest variance here is we are transferring more into the street CIP in order to be able to do some of the street projects that Ramey has. He will talk in more depth about his CIP and street programs later this evening. And then we've been putting more money aside for the P25 public safety radios with this additional funds. And I haven't seen the latest number, when it comes to the P25 stuff, but we will have saved to date 2.2 million in reference to that project.
Mr. Lavigny, what's the total cost since we were?
Yeah, as far as the contract with Motorola for equipment, that's both the city's equipment, fire and police, as well as our cost sharing with dispatch. We just signed the contract at $2,023,000.
And just another note, FY21 is the last year for that Eon building loan payment that will fall off. Okay, so in summary, we talked about all the revenues that we preliminarily are projecting.
The general fund.
This is general fund. And we talked about the operational expense baseline, but increasing the 2% salaries and then increase the contributions. You take the total revenues minus the total operational expenses, that still leaves us with a net revenue of $675,000.
And that's the funding that we'll be talking about with staff. So although you see this here, this is the funding that we will have available for the scenarios in which I'll talk to you a little bit about.
So it gives us a new fund balance of 11 million. You take out the 60-day fund balance, as that is our new target policy. Fund balance is 60 days. That leaves us with a balance of 6.2 million. You take out the transfers to the one-time projects. That leaves us with an unreserved balance of 3.5 million still.
So City Manager, are you set on that 60 days yet, or is that something that you're still in consideration of perhaps moving it from perhaps 60 to 62 or even a 65? Or are you set on that?
I'm going with what your policy is, and versus my policy, this is one of those council policy. Now, as far as a recommendation, I'm gonna work with Ms. Adina, our finance director, and that's why I said I want to bring some policies back to council and get your feedback on it and where we should be. But what I believe is that there should be a minimum, and then I think there should be a maximum. And as we get to that maximum, we're starting to invest in some of the projects. And so that's kind of, and I would ask her for her opinion as a finance professional. Where do you, as far as how many days you would recommend for the general fund?
For the general fund at this point, 60 days seems right around where a lot of cities are until you actually get a chance to look at the fund a little bit more and get comfortable with it. Then we might explore increasing that fund balance reserve a little bit, but you gotta really work into it because you wanna make sure you got a good foundation for your 60 days. Okay, if you're at 60 days steady, you got that solid, then we look at moving up to the next level with your permission. Okay. As we look at our fund balance policies, all our fiscal policies, they kind of feed into that so we can get there, okay?
So what this says to us with the total fund balance of 9 million, our one-time project is here. So even after that, you're still at a $9 million fund balance, which is well above 60 days.
But you guys being the expert, I'll just tell you my general thought would probably be 62, between 62 to 64.
65?
Yeah. Just a general
We
thought.
will, but what I'd like to
Just
do
a
is
thought
make
to
it a
you.
policy, not a city manager's practice.
But no, I said it, I think
Bring it back to you all.
I think the policy is 60, right?
It's 60.
So I'm just saying, that's the minimum, that's what, we have no choice, right?
Mhm.
I'm saying, just as you think through this more, just my personal thought was those numbers.
Well, on your policy, you wanna make sure your policy is something that you can do, so
That's 60,
60
right?
days is good.
Oh, yeah, and I'm not saying change policy, I'm
Yeah,
not saying change policy.
But if you wanna drive towards something more so that at some point you can change your policy because you're so comfortable with it, then I would recommend that. But right now, I would keep your policy at 60 days because you know you can obtain that. And then we work on gradually increasing it to 65 to whatever you want.
And we know we're above it. I'm not
Yeah.
recommending today that we take that 3.5 million and let's just spend it. That's not my recommendation. But I wanna make sure that I stick with what policies that have been set and only list where's my 60? There we go. What has been set by council policy, although there is still an additional 3.5 million. So I'm not recommending zeroing out the rest of the fund for other expenditures at all.
All right.
So is fire station number 1 gonna come toward the end when Greg talks about bonds?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Your question is, yes, we have a shortfall. It is getting more and more expensive by the day, and we're gonna have to come up with some additional funds to cover the
That's why we
expense.
set over and figuring
That's
out
why
on
that
the
number-
agenda that we're gonna talk about that at that point.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mayor Gordon, do you want to take a break before we get to utility fund?
Y'all wanna take a break?
Yes, I think we should.
I see a bunch of nods, okay.
Don't leave it up, don't leave it up. He'll say no.
Go and come as quickly as possible, please.
2017, 2018 especially, this was the last year that we have given or passed a rate increase onto water and sewer customers, okay? What this yellow and then blue columns here represent, this is our total ending fund balance into the utility fund, okay? That's what these columns mean. This gray column here, that is just that 60-day operational target. And as you see, that remaining balance, so after we take the operational expenses out of the equation, we take out the transfers out of the equation, that remaining balance that we have, you can see how it just takes a large dive, okay? And you can see as we keep spending down the fund balance to cover, that we will be in the negative.
Much of this is based on the fact that there are things that we don't control. I like to always say is, we don't own the water, and we do not treat wastewater. And so what happens is we are dependent on whatever charges TRA, who we pay for our store, and for our water, we purchase that water. And so their costs are rising, and as their cost continues to rise, because we have not continued to charge more as they charge more, it is slowly depleting our fund balance, and so we present this, and
Could you conjure up a chart that would compare our rates with their rates?
other area rates,
No,
or
no, no,
how
no,
much
no,
they
no, no,
charge
no, 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 no,
versus
no, no,
how much we pay.
No, how much we've been paying DWU each year, how much we've been paying TRA each year,
Yes.
and what have our rates to the customer been doing from year to year to year?
Absolutely, I see Miss Cotton over there shaking her head. She looked happy. We will take care of that, and we will make sure we include that and actually bring it back to you. We'll send it out to you, but we'll also make sure that's included in the briefing, because that's very important to talk about. And though we're giving a high level here, I'd like to show a historical of how much we've been paying. Yes.
Is it fair to say that the consultant we hired to examine all this for us is gonna come up with the same conclusion, that something has to happen to our water rates?
It's not sustainable. Truly.
I will say to you in conversations with the Best Southwest, they are in this fiscal year having increases. And I need to do some more research, and I'll let Public Works kind of add to it, and we'll come back with you on a rate study and where we should be versus where we are. This is just our preliminaries, but I believe that there are people who will come in and help us to understand what is it going to take to make sure that we don't bankrupt this fund.
I do believe
And
that.
Mayor, I'll just tell you, it's been my experience that any rate consultant will tell you, our minimum go up to match the increases that your main suppliers
Pass
are
through.
doing. Yeah,
Pass through.
just
Yes.
pass through, yeah.
And then from experience, we can't wait too late to do that, because we did it before and all of a sudden our rates shot up. Then everybody
Make up
knows
for
they
it.
gotta make up for it, so we can't wait too late to look at that recommendation.
When is the next analysis due by that consultant?
I believe next
That
year
was
we're up for a study.
Finance did those, not Public Works.
Yeah, so I believe next year we
Next
are up
year.
for a study, yes.
But I believe the study, when we did the study, we do a study like every 5 years. And they set the pace and they tell you what you should be doing each year. So it's up to council to adopt what they suggest to keep this fund sustainable. And I believe that has not been followed each year, what the recommendations are in that study.
So should we bring the study back to you all, that just to go over to refresh everybody? and we can make that a briefing at our next meeting.
Yeah, because as Mark was saying, we don't want to get too far behind like we did, because it's going to be a big hurt if we try to do the pass-through.
Yes.
Yeah, Greg, you had a point?
Does Dallas Water Utilities and or TRA, do they give you advance notice when they see large infrastructure repairs and problems that they're gonna be planning on in the future so that we can be prepared for the increased cost?
Scott?
Yes, sir. Actually, we participate as a part of advisory committees to both DW and TRA. And so they kind of give us, a look ahead regarding capital expenditures, any regulatory requirements, and that sort of thing.
So we'll be prepared if there's any
Yes.
large increases.
Yes. Ms. Colton?
I think one year, were you on the council?
Tell me more.
I'm
not gonna admit it yet.
No, the TRA came, an
4 years
actual
ago?
representative from TRA came, and I remember that discussion, so I guess it was.
Yeah.
About 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Yes. It's a couple years ago.
There was one where they came in and like the 10 mile is, a lot of you are talking about, Mr. Cooks, is the regulatory environment changes. And so you get all these, what they call unfunded mandates. And so, so they have that challenge of meeting new regulatory requirements, and that causes more increase. But 10 Mile is also, I think, doing an expansion as well, and a lot of upgrades to their existing facilities as well. And we're in the middle of that. Ms. Colton can certainly talk probably more. She's a little bit closer to the, as a board member. But yes, so they're doing a lot of things to get that plant refurbished, expanded, and upgraded to meet new requirements. And again, though, they're passing those costs down to their customers, in addition to whatever costs they would have in terms of their labor rates and their O&M rates and everything else. And so, like Ms. Odie said, we've, for the last several years, we've been eating that.
And just to show you, at the rate that we're going without any increase, we would be in the red there by FY26. All right, going into solid waste. Here's another fund that we'll need to have discussion about. But first, we do have 2 cost centers housed within the solid waste fund. Again, this is the garbage collection. We do have 5 personnel that are housed out of here. That's the litter crew that goes around and picks up the litter in the parks and on the right-of-ways, as well as we have one person in solid waste. The solid waste line item is what houses the contractual service that we pay, waste management, and we pay for our garbage collections. We are assuming at this point a 3% increase to garbage collections and a 3% into landfill charges for what the city's obligated to pay on our contract. I want to make note that, when we're talking about the revenues, at this point, we're not projecting any increases in the revenues, but we are, receiving 3% increase into our obligations on the contract for our garbage and our landfill charges. And I'll come back to another slide here in a minute to talk about that a little more. So, total transfers is also accounted for here. We do transfer $150,000 into the alley CIP to pay for alley reconstructions. Those that have alley pickup, they have a rate difference in their garbage collection that helps pay for those alley reconstruction projects, as well as a transfer out to the general fund, so that net experience total fund expenses $79,000.
Now, that 3% increase to the garbage with Republic, that does come to us as a council to approve, right?
Yes, sir. So every year, usually in September,
I know they ask for it, but
they
it's up to
come
us to approve
and
it.
as part of the contract, they can ask for an increase to their rate equal up to the index, the CPI All Urban for trash collection index. And I usually just assume a 3% CPI. Last year, the CPI was 2.9%, but they only raised our rate by 2% for residential. I think the full 2.9 went to the commercial customers that get dumpsters.
So this is worst case, it could be maybe a little less, but not much, at 3%.
Well, it all depends on inflation, because I listened to some of that, and some people, again, it depends on what the CPI is. I remember when we were watching it last year, it was 2.9, and then it even went above 3. Luckily, they pull it usually around this time of year. I can't remember when exactly. August, they pull it then. And so, like, luckily they pulled it then, and then like September it went up. So, it fluctuates, based on the overall economy.
Sorry, go back to that 208,700 transfer to general fund. Restate that again. Where's that going? Or why is that on the general fund?
This again is that administrative fee that covers the support of the general fund, such as accounting, HR, things like that. We do it for the utility fund, and we're doing it for, utility fund, solid waste fund, EDC, hotel, motel. They all have a fund transfer that comes out to support the general fund for our services to operate.
The reason I asked that again, because I know many citizens always question or have questions on that, not quite understanding why we're transferring money from the utility fund to the general fund. So I wanted that explanation stated again, is why I asked again.
Yes, and again, that is an accounting acceptable practice to do that.
Yeah, because you're using the overhead of your general government to help run the utilities and those services. So that's why we take a portion of the revenues and feed it into the general fund. So, because there's no personnel in this fund. It's all of it's managed through your general government, the service, HR, finance, all of those are managed through that. So that's why we take a portion of the fee from there in order to help us offset those costs.
There's no finance or HR personnel. There are people who are budgeted there, but they are not budgeting someone to do budget or human resources or procurement or IT work for them.
So talking about the fund balance here, again, total revenues, minus expenses, that leaves us with a net revenue of $65,000. Taking the transfers out of the equation, we're eating into fund balance, is what this negative 292 tells us. And we taking the 60 days out of the equation, we have a negative unreserved balance. It's not really reserved there, but basically this is just telling us that we are eating into the fund balance to cover those costs.
I think, is this the one that we don't actually have a policy on?
We don't have a policy on this one, on whether we need a 60-day fund balance or not.
We just give that as an example.
Right. So again, this is one of those funds, just similar to the utilities, that we will need to have a conversation about. Do we, raise rates for the garbage collection? Because we are, proposing a rate increase on our end. Do we pass that along to the citizens? The last time we did raise rates was going into FY20. But just, again, going with the rate of expense, the rate of it, we would be in the negative in FY24. I'll make an adjustment. Okay, talking about drainage. We have two areas here, drainage administration. We do have 3.5 full-time equivalents that are housed in the drainage fund to manage the stormwater compliance, as well as the street crew that does the drainage. CIP projects, they vary from year to year. We do have an emergency bag wall erosion repair that we have to do this year and into next year. So that is the explanation of that large increase there on the CIP projects, and Mr. Rainey will go into that when he gets to his CIP presentation. So drainage, we are the net expense is $910,000, again because we had to take fund balance to support that emergency repair, and where we're proposing to. Getting into the Fieldhouse. Our expenses are back, we're budgeting our expenses to be at pre-COVID levels. Again, there is that 2% salary increase in there for staff. The staff is housed in the administration. We have we have 3 full-time staff, and I realize I don't have it there, and we have part-timers as well. We do have a one-time cost in here to refurnish the gym floors, because it's time to refurnish the gym floors. We have to keep those gym floors in tip-top shape. We do have various repairs that we'll see within that proposed budget for HVAC, suite heaters, things like that. So our cost at the end of the day is up $191,000. And we are still paying the debt here, as you can see, just around our FY25 is when that debt finally falls off.
Is that just one gym floor?
Both sides.
Is that one, both sides?
Both sides.
Jennifer, what is that, other?
There was a line item category, and I have moved this up into administration. It didn't make sense to account for it in another line item. There were things like they have a golf cart rental that was budgeted there, and various other things. So I just took it away and put it accounted for in administration. Didn't need a separate line item for it. So Fieldhouse, we are projecting a revenue of $1,000 at this point. So. And we're continuing there. Economic development, again, special revenue fund here. So Gus has made quite a few changes. He's made some programs that he is going to be doing this next proposed year. A lot of that variance here, increase in expenditures, has to do with, and we're going to be getting an intern. We're increasing that amount that we're going to dedicate towards an intern. We are going to get a software subscription that has better analytical data capabilities and consumer demographics, things like that. Putting some additional expenditures in there to update the comp plan, area plans, opportunity areas. Putting $80,000 into marketing campaign initiatives. We are increasing our demolition program because that'll be a significant focus for him to increase that program and utilization. So he is putting more into the program. Things that are housed within this, we do have, it says 1.9, we have 2 full-time people that are housed partly here and partly in hotel, motel. We do have, under the programs, that's where we have beautification, and we have sustainable beautification, and keep Duncanville beautiful and all of those things. We have seasonal employees that are housed there. You show the line item for the debt. The DC debt did fall off. 2021 this is the last year for that debt, like I said. So at the end of the day, that's a variance there.
Mr. Harvey has a question.
Yes.
This question is actually for Gus. Gus, when you spoke to us last night, you talked about how it's important for prospective business owners when they're trying to make their decision in terms of the upkeep of the properties in the area that they're looking at. Did I get that correctly?
Yes, you did, yes, sir.
So is there a connection to demolition and that, or am I just?
No, that's absolutely right. So one of the reasons why I'm increasing the demolition program is because we're implementing a top-of-mind marketing program, as you saw. There is an $80,000 increase. Part of that is to promote the demolition program that has been set by this council. We have historically not utilized it effectively or utilized it as much as we should. It's an amazing incentive program, and yet I think it's highly unutilized. As we ramp up, the runway should show that we market it more and get more buildings utilizing it as we do that. And that's why I'm ramping it up, because I'm anticipating that we would have more people wanting to utilize it. I'm already getting positive response from some of the shopping centers I've been talking to and developers and partners that we have in the city, and hopefully they'll start applying to these programs. We've already sent out several applications. I would anticipate that they would utilize it, and we will be awarding grant programs to revitalize and redevelop some of the buildings we have. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do have a considerable amount of information to present if you would like me to. Here, right now.
No.
answer.
But
We'll bring this back.
but thank you for letting us know. Thank you for, we'll come.
It's a considerable amount of money, and I would love to spend some time.
We'll come back around.
So fund balance here, the net here is 1.2 million going back into fund balance, really healthy fund balance for him to do what he needs to do so we can do more economic development in our city. Going into the hotel motel, not much difference in terms of expenses here. Again, we do two positions that are partly in economic development and a small portion get accounted for here because they do administer this fund and the programs that come out of this fund. So just some of those items that we've been budgeting for. The wayfinding sign, we haven't done that project yet, but we do have that funding housed here. Fieldhouse advertising, we've been helping them with their advertising and with their building the patio and some of those expenses to upgrade over there. That is housed here. But just to note that Fieldhouse is able to absorb more of that into their operational budget. We have that 100,000 there in the major event planning, as well as all the grants incentives that we typically see that we pay out for like Duncanville Community Theater, Gasso, Sandra Meadows. Some of those things are they are budgeted for here, but of course that is based on the applications we receive, and then when we take it to you to approve, that could change. So.
And just a comment, that's why I was saying earlier about the things that we approved in previous years. Occasionally, let's get an update on where those are, because those are very good ideas, but they haven't moved, they haven't evolved.
So if I could comment on that, one of the items you saw in my budget was some software that provides additional information for council. As you probably have stepped out for a second, but I'm assuming that you talked about what these would bring or attract to the community with regard to hotels and people visiting us. So there is software out there called Placer AI. I don't know if I discussed it with anybody here. But Placer AI will actually tell you how many people are visiting for these events and what the economic impact would be based on demographics, spending patterns, what restaurants they visited, where they went, updated every 24 hours. And so that information is now available through smartphones, which code is embedded in about 500 different programs. And through various algorithms with about a 98% accuracy rate, they can tell you exactly how many people are visiting, where they're eating, how much you're spending, and who they are as far as their demographics. So many times you may ask the question, Gus, how many people are coming to our community for an event? Are they eating here or where are they going? I can tell you where we have to geofence and pull the report within 24 hours of the event, and I can tell you how much was, to about 98% accuracy, how much was spent and where they went, and whether it was a successful event, and whether you want to do it again the following year. That's part of that Placer AI software.
That's exactly why I think, to your point of coming back later to present all of this information that you have, that we really need it. When we served on a small business group, one of the business owners said that exact same to us as a small business pilot group, advisory group. And when I brought it to the previous area, we knew nothing about it, didn't know how to get the information. Now you're telling us more about it. So I love to spend more time with economic development. That is the key component of our city to grow, is to hear things that you're talking about. We just have to, we as a council have to set aside some time to say, if we're not in a rush, give it to us.
To speak to what with Councilmember Harvey, and I think it's important because as we started to talk about scenarios, what we've discovered is a lot of things that were approved by council were put on hold. And so you may not know they were put on hold because you approved them in the budget, but part of our practices have been, well, if you haven't done it, let's just hold that funding. But I think we have to come back and at least say something along the way that this project's there. As we looked at our scenarios and I started talking to folks, I realized that there's actually already funding there for it. We just didn't do it. A great example is park lights. So.
And I agree, and I think we all understand why there wasn't any movement, but all of that is now changing, and so now that the team is in place, so to speak, let's get moving.
Start measuring. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, talking about fund balance here, in revenues over operations, there's a slight decrease there, 3 million less, but again, we have a healthy fund balance.
3,000.
Yeah, 3,000. Healthy fund balance for the hotel motel. We're getting into some of these other funds we haven't really talked about because there's not a whole lot happening so far. The tax increment financing fund is one of those. We started that a few years ago. DC gave a contribution to start that fund, and so for now we have just been building the fund balance so we can use this in the later years. But again, this is only based on the incremental difference of the values of that area as what we capture for revenue.
Now, the $150,000 seed money that was given to the TIF from the EDC was a loan.
Oh, okay.
Is there any process involved in getting that money back into
Yes.
EDC?
In 2025, if the TIF fund does not perform or does not utilize the monies, then that money automatically would be reclaimed by the EDC. It's $150,000.
Okay.
Now, we just had a meeting with our TIF board, and we have you see the amount that we have. And so we do know that even though we're proposing $75,000, it's because we haven't gotten the certified tax rolls, which there probably will be an adjustment. But I would fully anticipate that the TIF board would begin to start utilizing some of those funds, at least do something, and possibly having to do with our gateways and our what I call doorways to Duncanville.
And there's some nominal expenses that we budget here, and that's just really just some supplies and some legal professional counsel and that sort of thing, but very
Just
small.
general information, the use of those monies in the TIF are just as specific as the monies are for the hot funds.
Yes.
9 criteria for hot. There's very specific things you can do with the money in the TIF. You just can't play with it.
I will say that it was mentioned earlier about possibly utilizing some of the EDC monies for some of the landscaping and mowing, et cetera. Some of those, to your point, some of those restricted expenditures, those could be utilized for those as well. Landscaping, infrastructure improvements, offsites, et cetera. So that's another source of revenue that would get the TIF to start utilizing some of that money. And since the EDC did fund it with 150 initial funding, you could get some of your money utilized through that. Now, the board does act independently of the council. However, as you know, the board is appointed by the council.
Right.
So this is one of those internal funds that we have. This is our liability insurance that pays for workers' comp and property claims, things like that. Just showing you, these are those contributions that we showed you that all the funds are making in those cost centers. This is to pay for our premium that we have to pay to TML, our insurance provider. So this is what pays for those insurance premiums. It's what pays for what we put in kind of a target number of expected claims. That can vary from year to year. It just depends on workers' comp claims, depends on the liability claims that come up. So our fund balance is doing pretty well, and that's what we project to propose at this time. The IT replacement. Here's one of the replacement funds, so we can replace our IT infrastructure, our computers and things like that when we need to, when they come due to replace. So in FY20, our contribution level was set at 30% to help our adopted is at 80%, so we're moving it up to 100%. As we look into the outer years and knowing what's coming up and what's due for replacement, we'll have bigger years in some years than others. And so kind of looking forward 5 years, seeing where that pans out, that's why we felt we needed to increase that contribution back up to 100% in order to keep that fund balance not in the negative to cover those expected replacements. So ending the proposed there at 55. Same thing with the fleet replacement. In FY 19-20 actual, we kind of had it broken down amongst the various funds of how much that fund supported. So 40% was general fund, 70% was utility, 50% was solid waste. We did a flat 40% of all funds in the adopted, but looking out and to the expenses that we have coming, we have 2 ambulances that we're going to be replacing in this coming year, and those are pretty expensive. So taking those things into consideration, knowing what we have coming up, and we were seeing that we were really spending down on that fund balance for those fleet replacements, so we needed to increase our contributions in order to keep that fund from going into the red.
And as we talk in the future, this is where we'll talk about the potential of equipment notes and things like that. It can be short-term borrowing, but it allows us to get things up front and then work on it in a different fashion. We'll have to think about it, we'll have to look at it, we'll have to look at the rates. I mean, so sometimes things are very low, but as emergencies happen, we're starting to see the wear and tear on our public safety vehicles and things like that more than anything else.
And that is it
Okay,
for
this
our
is the complicated portion. Just to give you a high level is, staffs ask at the beginning of the budget to put in their budget numbers. And what they give us is what we call scenarios, and you've probably heard this before. We started already putting them in buckets of kind of, but the most important thing to say is, as we talked about ending fund balance, is I had around $2.2 million worth of total cost scenarios that were presented by us, $2.1 million worth of scenarios. So that ranged from additional staff to raises for staff to equipment. And so as we're going to be talking next week, we're going to talk about what are those buckets, and I think you had a name for it. Art, was that you?
Must do, should do's, and nice to do's.
So the must do's, should do, nice to do's, and what are the other things we can do? One of the main things that's not in this list is things that we can do this year. We've looked at our departments and they have some savings that's already there. And so we're looking to see what things we can fund that are already there. And that, I call it some of our low-hanging fruit. But just to give you an example, we know that our fund balance does not support even this level. And so we've got to go back and rethink and have some conversations. And so that's what's missing in the bucket. Some things we're going to have to delay. We just know we can't do it because, as the mayor mentioned earlier, we got to have a conversation about a fire station very soon. And so those are where we are. We will be meeting as a team. I've got a team exercise that we're going to do. And in our teams next week, our teams are going to start ranking. And even though we have a guess here of where some things fall, our team, as the executive team getting together, will go through and rank what we will bring forward to you. Now, my philosophy is, even though it may be a must do now and a want to do, as we start to see funds coming in at mid-year, we may have to come back and touch some of these, and we may be able to. We also may be able to fund some of these through other mechanisms, and that's where we're starting to talk to people like, what can be funded by economic development? I will tell you from my overview of it, one of the things that I've included that's I think is important is body cameras for our code and our health inspector. And so that's because I find often, just like with our police officers, the protection that they get from wearing those cameras is great, but also as we start to have communications with our citizens, especially as a neighborhood services officer, I find that to be an important thing to have, and so it's something that I believe in. Another initiative that we're working on is vehicle tracking systems. And so that you do it with police, but with the vehicles that we have, our public works vehicles, often you may get a call saying, there's been a car parked there for 5 minutes and we don't know what they're doing. Well, Mr. Ramey, through his team, will be able to go into the system and find out. And so those are some of the things there, and I will get you more detail, but I don't want to bring these scenarios because none of these fall in any of these categories. And that gets us to debt. You doing debt, ma'am? Oh, she's doing debt, okay.
This one will be very brief. Just going over what our obligations are at this point. Again, the GO bond that we issued in 2019, 21.6 million there. The last payment is scheduled for February of 2039. Feels so far off into the future. The earliest that we could possibly look at refinancing any of that debt, if interest rates are favorable, would be in 2028. The annual debt service averages 1.4 million. So starting of FY22, our principal outstanding balance is set at 19.6 million. Utility fund debt, we retired that in FY20. The Fieldhouse debt, the last payment due there is in August of 2025. That average debt service there is $537,000, and as of the beginning of FY22, the outstanding principal is to $2 million. And then this current fiscal year is the last year for the DCEDC debt, and that will fall off. And that's just that service overview. So Mr. Ramey is going to talk about CIP.
Can I brief off to this side? Would that be all right? Oh, I can see this one better. Again, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Greg Ramey, the Public Works Director. Again, what we'll be talking about is what I'm planning to do for FY22, and then again, what I'm proposing to do in FY23 to 27. As you know, every year we have a plan, and then usually that changes as we go forward, and it gets massaged. So again, for new council and for those at home, again, the CIP program, as they talked about, is our plan for next year, and then our proposed plan for the following 5 years. We prioritize the plan based on emergency work. So examples of that, as we talked about before during Uri, the aerial line, one of our aerial water line along Oriole that goes over I-20 froze and exploded. So that's one that we're, pulled forward and did, as well as Ms. Odie mentioned previously, we learned earlier this year with all the rain that we had significant failures in city-owned bag walls along 10 Mile Creek vicinity, Swan Ridge. So those are some examples of emergency. The water wastewater master plan. So several years ago, we commissioned a water wastewater master plan to look at our system, look at our opportunity areas, and propose projects that would bring the city forward. Again, the goal that I had tasked the firm with was we have these opportunity areas, identifying the comp plan, we have a vision, and I do not want those areas to, I want to make sure that we have the appropriate utilities so that they don't starve. The culminating, and we'll talk about it as we get to the utilities, I think the culminating project of the current water wastewater master plan is a new water tower, 1 million gallon water tower at the very, very north end of Redbird Park. As you know, the water pressure up north is very low. A lot of it is due to, it's due to the North Main is about 10 feet too low. And so we can't fill up Clark all the way. And so we would build a new tower at Redbird at the same elevation as Clark, and then we would then just deconstruct the one at North Main.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
This proposed new tower, we already own the land?
Yes, sir.
Very good.
Yes, sir. And then finally, we look at the maintenance and repair work. So this is where we work with our superintendents, primarily utility superintendent, as then I'll talk about streets as we move forward. Where are his areas of concern? Where has he seen, excessive water main breaks, old water area, water mains, looping opportunities, etc. And then we plug those in as well into our budget. And then again, just to get the CIP program, you'll see we'll talk about streets, alleys, sidewalks, our drainage system, storm erosion control, stormwater, traffic signals if those come up, and then utility systems. So here's just a summary of all the funds. As you'll see, we have utilities CIP, but again, as I mentioned several times in different meetings with y'all, we do have a wastewater pipe bursting program. Again, that's part of our arrangement with TCEQ for sanitary sewer overflows. And then you'll see the bag wall program and CIP, those are the green for drainage. Of note is street and sidewalk CIP. So this is really key, and you'll see it again as we go forward in the street and sidewalk. I'm proposing $8.2 million for streets and sidewalks through 2027. However, we have there's not an enterprise fund associated with it. So there is not a particular funding source for the $6.760 million that I'm asking for. And so this is something every year we have to see, and how we do the allocations out of the general fund. So moving into the alley fund, as Jennifer mentioned, the alley fund is funded from a transfer from the solid waste. As you know, we have a lot of alley customers. Approximately 20% of the city receives their service or trash collection service from the alleys, and we have some of our older alleys that are asphalt. And so this program that for the alleys is a slow but steady conversion of the old alley, asphalt alleys into concrete alleys. Of note, however, as you can see here, we have to be we have to pace ourselves. And so with 22, we're doing some construction. In 24, we're continuing the alley. This is the Cherry Alley is extra long, but then in 26, we won't be able to do another alley. And so what you'll see with the alley fund based on this allocation from the solid waste fund is we design an alley, save some money, build it, design another alley, save some money, build it as we go. And even the focus has been for the last few years and actually continuing into the out years is finishing the alleys in the Forest Hill subdivision. Yes, sir.
Some years ago, I think the city used a third party, like laying concrete and that sort of thing. And then, if I remember correctly, some years ago, the city set up a crew to do it in-house. So, is that still work?
So what we do have, sir, is in the street department a sidewalk construction crew. Their focus is in sidewalk repairs and upgrades. So as you see in our quarterly reports, and we sort of give you small tidbits of progress every weekly report. But what we've been doing is assigning them a subdivision. They're their older subdivisions. They typically don't even have ADA ramps in them. They're that old. They're just sidewalks. They're in our more walkable areas. They go in and they just stay in a particular neighborhood, and they just work through that neighborhood, addressing all the issues with the sidewalks, issues with the ramps. But then they do get pulled. So we'll be working, and then we need to go, we'll do other projects that the city needs them for, and then we come back. We just finished West Park, and now we just moved in the last few weeks into Mary Brook Park, just down off of Main Street. So we're in our fourth subdivision now since we started doing that about 2 years ago. But these projects are very large in scale. The city workforce is not really set up to do major capital improvement. They're more targeted response. Moving into the drainage fund, again, as Jennifer mentioned, the drainage fund is funded from the stormwater drainage utility fees. And then you'll see that she's already, I'm more focused on the bag wall program again in the drainage CIP. And the highlights here are in FY22 is constructing the city-owned bag walls along 10 Mile Creek. That was the emergency project that we're working on. And then in 27 will be really the next major CIP project is at South Peach. And this is one of those instances where I had this teed up a little bit earlier, sort of like talking about how these out years tend to be a little bit more flexible. So I had South Peach a little bit earlier, but then the Swan Ridge bag walls emergency came up. I had to shift money around, and that sometimes pushes other projects to the right. Moving into the streets and sidewalk fund, as I mentioned before, there's not a set allocation for street and sidewalk. So this is street and sidewalk CIP is funded directly out of out of the general fund. The only funds that we are subject to the budget, but are at least in the budget currently, is for FY '22. And that is the $1.3 million for some street CIP projects and $91,000 for sidewalks. So again, just to highlight those, what the city has is we have a bunch of community development block grant locations in town, CDBG, that kick out funds every 2 years. And so every 2 years, I'm sure council remembers, we come and say we get 2 years of money from the county through the federal government. And typically that pays for one code officer who patrols the CDBG. And then it typically kicks out around $100,000 for other projects. And what we've been typically using is that money to do sidewalks. And so this 91 here actually reflects the refund that we would be getting for the sidewalk program that we're finishing designs and teeing up to execute this year. The other part that I want to talk about in the FY '23 budget, you see $33.6 million in street CIP that will tie to this highlighted item that I'll go through as I go through. Yes, sir.
Go back to the sidewalk for just a second. I do see the streets there, but how long Lintcrest and Southwood? I know those streets really desperately need for sidewalks. Is that something you bring back to us later? Because I'm not sure how many years they've been without sidewalks.
The challenge with the areas that you're talking about, sir, off of Southwood, as you know, I run there a lot, is it's not as easy as putting in sidewalks.
Okay.
That would be a project that is significant CIP, not only tied to the road, as you know, they're ditches. So any improvements or sidewalks would be tied to new streets, new curb, adding curb and gutter, adding underground stormwater, and then sidewalks. So that is something that would be, obviously if that's council, but it would take a lot of coordination. You know, we'd be pulling money out of the drainage fund to help with the stormwater. Depending on where the utilities are, we would have to reallocate and reprogram utility fund money if there's any utilities under the streets. And then again, we would be coming to council and having to look at the general fund for the allocations for that significant pavement. So I typically, my plan and my program does not reflect any conversions of streets that have ditches, what we would call unimproved streets that do not have curb and gutter, any upgrades to any of those streets into a situation that they would become curb and gutter.
Thank you.
Very, very costly transformation, sir. But I do want to highlight again some of the program things that we're proposing to do both next year and then in the out years. So we have 2 roads that are very badly in need of reconstruction. That's Swan Ridge from Cedar Hill to Birdwood. We're able to, from Birdwood further east on Swan Ridge, we were able to use, I think mill and overlay or micro. That pavement is very good condition. However, between this one section, I think it's just tied to proximity to the creek and maybe how it was built back in the day, some of the soil. But that part of the road is beyond repairs. And so what this project is to reconstruct Swan Ridge. And as you notice, that is combined with the utilities work to address all the subsurface utilities. Yes, sir.
So when you say reconstruct, you're talking everything's got.
That's like all the way down to bottom of water line and sewer line, all the way back up. A complete rehab, like what we're doing at Daniel Dale, not as big a scope, but or at Cedar Ridge. I mean, a complete replacement, brand new road all the way from the sub-base below the utility infrastructure all the way up, and that would be the same at East Carr. And then we got sidewalk improvements, Oriole Boulevard, from Fair Meadows to Camp Wisdom. I'm assuming based on our funding with, again, some of the residual red light funds that have transferred along with that 91, that would take about 2 years to do in phases. But again, that is an area that has been observed to get a lot of foot and pedestrian traffic between Fair Meadows North and the commercial area on Camp Wisdom. And it is very, very challenging to traverse. And so that was a project I want to do to improve that walkability. 23, the reason why I'm highlighting this is that, as you know, Daniel Dale Road reconstruction converted the section of Daniel Dale between Main Street and US 67 to 4-lane divided with large bike and pedestrian facilities on both sides. And at the time, the engineer recommended what we called an interim solution to continue that conversion through the rest of the Daniel Dale corridor. Again, heading east across I-20 or US 67 to tie into the proposed 4-lane road in DeSoto at the city limit, and they'll have, again, similar bike and pedestrian facilities as we're putting in on our section of Daniel Dale. And then as you go west, continuing and tying into the 4-lane with bike and pedestrian facilities that Dallas has across Clark. And so I have a slide, but what we're looking at in my cost estimates, just to take those outside lanes on Daniel Dale and convert them into bicycle lanes with pavement markings as well as curb and delineators across that entire corridor is estimated to be about $3 million. Now that's the whole corridor, and it could break up into some phases, but again, it would be, you know, the council's feedback on, you know, what was an acceptable conversion timeline that you would want to do.
Is that tied into a bike lane system in Dallas?
Yes, sir. And then further bike lane systems in DeSoto as well. And then there's some supplementary bike lanes that are like shared use bike lanes that Parks has already put in their program.
That's not including any grant opportunity that could come along with that as well, is that right?
That's correct. There periodically are potential for grant opportunities. I know Mr. Stevenson has said that some of the COG agencies that he is partners with are interested in this project. We did last year work with the county on a build grant with them. It was a bigger multi-city endeavor along Daniel Dale, where we would have gotten at least the eastern half or the eastern section of Daniel Dale converted to interim bike lanes. But unfortunately, that didn't get all the way through the award process, or in terms of winning that grant.
Well, we submitted a grant to COG for the Transportation Alternative Program last year. Most of those fundings went to DART and projects associated with DART. However, talking to the COG representatives, they're very excited about this project because it's going to link Dallas, Duncanville, DeSoto, Lancaster, moving on. So they are very interested in this project. He believes they're going to have some additional buckets of money available this fall, and he wants us to apply for it. And in fact, he said it may not even be a competitive process. He thinks he's going to have try to find some funding for this project for us.
I like him already. And I'm supposed to speak with State Rep Yvonne Davis. She's also willing to sit down and talk to you as well about grant opportunities. And I know that Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson had funding. They waited till too late to give us.
Just not enough time to get that done.
Yeah, wasn't enough time to get it done.
We all tried.
And how much money was that, by the way?
Oh gosh.
Do you really want to know?
It was a lot.
It was a lot.
It was a lot of money that
all 4 cities were involved, but none of the cities could commit our match at that time, within a 2-week period, basically, to get all that done. So it was just too short of a fuse to make that happen.
So I say that to say that it is not just local. We have some other elected officials that can work with us to get some of this done. Thank you.
So again, I'll show you, run down the slide as well so you can get the bigger picture of that. And again, we've just got some other streets that, Beaver Creek reconstruction. Highlight again, just to put it on your radar, as you know, we're finishing up the Wintergreen Road segment that runs from Main Street east that ties into the old, I guess the current Wintergreen Road. And I've put this in proposal, again, as be a partnership again with DeSoto, but to continue that emphasis of the 4-lane divided road along the southern city limits, again, with the intent that I should open up some opportunity in that area as well.
Is that one of the roads that we have a road guy somewhere at Duncanville, forgot his name, that's always trying to tie back into, is that the road he's talking about? Oh, is that his name? Great. Oh, yeah, great. Yes,
yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is one.
Okay, thanks.
So just again, for the Daniel Dale Road interim bike lanes, this up here in the upper right is what would be the proposed cross section of the interim solution. And then you can just sort of see the segments as well as what I was proposing as if we needed to break this into pieces, the priorities. We would work west, section by section, and then we would continue to east.
Could you go back one slide, please, just for a second? Way out in 2027, that Redbird Hill City to Duncanville Road, is that gonna alleviate those problems on the houses where they all have those bird baths after it rains at their driveways? They got for 3 or 4 days after it rains, they've got large bodies of water at their driveways where it joins into the street. Is that part of the thing?
That would certainly be integrated with this, and again, this is tied with the utility CIP project that would again feed the, set the conditions for that new water.
I realize that's way out there, but I got some pictures I will share with you later.
Mr. Ramey, is this the part where you would mention the discussions we're having about the roundabout at Daniel Dale?
That would be a bond. So again, that was just the layout. Again, it's going Clark east to Main Street and then carry down to the bottom, Main Street east to the DeSoto city limits. And then looking at utility fund summary, what I want to highlight again is that you notice that when we break the CIP up and for utilities, again, to highlight the $1 million for SSO pipe bursting or wastewater pipe bursting as part of our SSO mitigation program. And then the balance is our CIP. Again, you'll see the highlights here. What I want to highlight is Cedar Ridge. So we've got that bond project pending. That project is a jointly funded both between the utility fund and the bond fund. Utilities helps pay for some of the affected pavement. And so that's the best way for us to get synergy on the streets is to work with the utility fund. But again, going back to very I won't say unstable, that would be, it's very undetermined what our street fund is going to be every year and what's available, so it makes it challenging for me to be able to synchronize some of our major utility projects with a associated street project so that we get that synergy. Because again, when we're talking utility projects, we're tearing up pavement, and that's a really good time to partner utility projects with some pavement money, with the street project with some pavement money. Yes, sir.
Primary difference being that utilities fund has a quote-unquote dedicated revenue stream ongoing, and the general government street projects basically don't.
Yes, sir, that's correct. Another highlight again for this year is the generator at Summit Pump Station. So this is our last emergency generator for that we need for the utility system for our pump stations. This actually was down, was offline during Winter Storm Uri, which sort of put us in that pinch. I mean, fortunately, we have maintained our water pressure, our water supply, but it was 5 million gallons worth of water that we were not able to get to. So this is going in next year. It's currently in design, and we are looking also. It's actually made some of the preliminary cuts for some FEMA money, but we're not counting on that anymore. We need to get that generator in place.
And that is something that will meet TCEQ requirements?
Yes. We have to have these new risk and resiliency plans and emergency response plans with our water system, so making sure that we have backup power at all our pump stations is one way that we make sure that we continue to provide that service with or without power.
I would think it'd be good for the public to know that a number of the things that we're doing is compliance related type stuff. I think that's very important.
Yes, sir, and just in general readiness related as well. We want to make sure that we can continue to provide those services to this, to our residents. I'll just leave the rest up here for the review. Yes, sir.
I got a question because I see it on here again. So you're talking about putting that water tower in Redbird Park.
Yes, sir, that is.
It's not a big park.
It's about 5 acres.
Yeah, it's very, very far.
Do we have any other water towers in parks?
There's plenty of land in that park just for.
No, there isn't.
Yeah, there is.
No, there isn't.
Yeah.
No.
I've
that park.
I've walked it several times. There's plenty of room up in that corner for it.
Let's see.
Take a look at the acreage that the current one on Clark Road takes up.
It's not a park.
Planted up there, and there's plenty of room for it.
So another slide that I like to show every year is our sanitary sewer overflow mitigation. Again, we have, as part of our TCEQ SSO mitigation plan, we do allocate $1 million a year for pipe bursting and manhole spray lining. Again, being part of the TCEQ SSO mitigation plan means that in the event we have SSOs, because we're showing that we're proactively working to mitigate those, if they do happen, then we are able to be forgiven, unfined, as long as we are doing our proper notifications and as well as we are continuing our process. And then again, as you remember, about a meeting or so ago, council approved the sewer basin study for one of our sewer basins. What I do want to highlight, because I know we want to see how are we making a difference in terms of SSOs. So last year when I briefed council, or let me walk you through the slide again. So what you're seeing on the slide, these yellow circles represent locations of our known SSO manholes. These were from the February, I think 2019, where we popped all over the city. After our FY19, FY20 pipe bursting, and we came to you last year, we had 3 of them that were typically the ones that sort of popped, and they sort of SSOs typically go in a certain sequence. These first 3 were no longer popping. And the next one is typically the one at Forest Circle, which is right in here. And knock on wood, We've had a lot of rain so far this year, but we've had no SSOs. Yes, sir.
And I think that's a really good story. That's why I was asking earlier, when we've done things in the past, and periodically as we move into the future, let's have a follow-up on it so that the public can understand how the resources, their fees and their taxes and what have you, are improving quality of life in this community. And then the other side of that is you control the SSOs, you also control the cost of treating sewage, right?
Yes. And the pipe bursting does take care of the inflow and infiltration. And what we do not want to do, not only do we not want wastewater coming out of manholes, mixed with rainwater that gets into the creeks, but we also want to mitigate how much rainwater that TRA has to treat. When it gets to TRA, they treat it all as wastewater. So we want to just treat wastewater. The years here just correlate to different years. We've been tracking this since 2013. And then the areas in pink with the little gray bubbles around them represent the areas that we are working towards in the next year. So just looking at street maintenance, this is not the street CIP project, so we're not talking in this slide the complete rehabs, the Swan Ridges that we're proposing, the Daniel Dale that's underway, the Cedar Ridge that's in the starting process. These are street maintenance. We're talking about microsurfacing, mill and overlay, crack sealing, pavement lifting. These are the maintenance activities that we are trying to do so that we do not need to have CIP projects in the future. It's to take care of the pavement that we already have. What I want to highlight though is in 2015, we did a pavement condition survey of all the city's streets and alleys. And at that time, they recommended, based on the targeted goals of maintaining our pavement, $3.5 million is what they said that we needed to have in order to adequately take care of the streets that we have and keep the streets that we have that are in good condition, continue them in good condition. What you'll see is that, again, this line right here is that $3.5 million. We didn't start really putting any money into street maintenance above a relatively historical average in the 500s until FY18. And as you continue through, we're just, the black line here going from 22 out represents basically a flat level of funding for street maintenance, and the red represents the deficit between what we have been getting in the last few years and what is recommended. When we are looking at the pavement maintenance priorities, I know we get a lot of calls about my road, needs it, or you did this neighborhood, when is it my turn, and those kinds of things, and we totally understand. But there are a lot of conditions and criteria that goes into what gets what when. So the pavement study makes recommendations based on that condition index that they took in 2015. And it populates the recommendations like these streets we recommend for microsurfacing. These streets we recommend for mill and overlay, so on and so forth. But what we do then is we go out and validate those streets with the eye. But then this is key, is we have to deconflict utility projects. So we may have roads that recommend a mill and overlay, but I've got to align my street projects with it so that I'm not cutting up new pavement. So good examples, I'm sorry, sir.
I'm going to finish your statement.
So some good examples of that you'll probably see very recently is High Ridge. That was a wastewater project from about 2 years ago. That's on a mill and overlay job this year. Would be a good example of where we do the work and then we follow it up later. An example of when different study recommendations determine who gets what. So down in, I can't remember the name of the subdivision, it's the one right across the street from Fire Station 2. We were able to microsurface pretty much every road in that neighborhood except for one, Linda Lane. And we did get a lot of calls, well, hey, you did everybody else in my neighborhood, when's my turn? Well, I had to explain, we microsurfaced everywhere else, but based on the condition of your pavement, we have to mill and overlay it. So we've got to put that in the program. And so that's a project that we're doing this year. And so it's not, and so something maybe you can take back to your constituency is that if we're skipping, it looks like we're sort of jumping around in a particular subdivision, it's because we're trying to synchronize utility projects, synchronizing, well, this road needs mill and overlay, this road needs microsurfacing, this one is good until maybe next year, because I gotta go do this other one. And so again, it goes back into this right here. I've still got to prioritize the budget, the streets against the budget. Yes, sir.
So in 2015, when that street condition pavement analysis was done, did they provide an overall score of the streets in Duncanville?
Yes, they did.
Do you remember what it was?
No.
It's 73%.
I remember it was, yes, I've got this report on my desk, but I don't remember. It was one where we had, and I can certainly go back out, I think I've pulled that out of slides a while, but I'll certainly be able to provide you with the score that we had for the city at the time of the 2015. The last thing that I want.
Before you go to them, so
yes,
if
sir.
we have a recommended level of 3.5 million and we are flat through 27, will there be a plan to kind of add to that, the maintenance here? Because we're flat at 1.6 and we have no plans of even trying to get there. We would never make our goals. So will there be a plan to increase it? I know it's all about funding, but is there a plan?
I certainly will work with the city manager on what we can do.
As we are listening to him, one of the conversations I was having with Ms. Adina is as he talks about our funding sources, looking at tying at least some of the funding to things like permits and things like that, so that we can just come with a policy that says 1% or 10% of this goes towards streets. Right now, it's in a transfer, and that transfer decision is made basically based on what we have. And Jennifer has a number of different formulas. So we're going to work on something to look at how do we start to increase that funding. But I think tying it to something like permits, because that is where you see the development happening, it also gives us the ability to come back and say that as we increase these, then we also will see more funding available. So we're going to look to see where we can do some sources that are tied to our street maintenance program.
Which goes back to the fact that the utility rate is built in with a infrastructure upkeep charge. The property tax base is not. Once you get past taking care of Chief Brody and Chief Bigny and Bart and admin, there's just not much left of what's coming in. So then I agree with the city manager, then you have to be creative and look at one-time surges, whatever they may be, to reallocate them into streets.
Yes, sir. The one last thing I wanted to highlight is we did, one of the budget scenarios that we were proposing was to reassess the PCIs next year. As again, we did it in 15, but we really didn't start putting money in until 18. And so what we wanted to do was get about a 5-year look to see if, how this is, are we at least moving the ball in slowly increasing our PCIs on average overall. So, and something else, there's just a lot more technology.
That was the PCI, I'm still trying to look what PCI is.
Oh, PCI is just pavement condition index. So, a brand new road is a 100, and when you're looking at like Swan Ridge, probably looking at like a 20, 30, just over the big thing is for PCIs is it's a very gradual curve until you get to about 60, and then it just like goes off a cliff. And so we want to keep our pavement between 100 and 60, 160, not 160. Because as long as we keep it in the top end of the PCI, microsurfacing and mill and overlay, or for concrete replacement, slab replacements, keep you from having to do those high dollar full reconstruction projects.
And that's about an $80,000 cost, right?
So basically what we're looking at is, these are rough order of magnitudes, but just to show you pricing by what we call lane mile. So a 2-lane road that's 1 mile long is 2 lane miles. A 1 lane mile, again, just for pavement, for micro surfacing is about $10,000 a lane mile. Mill and overlay is around $100,000 a lane mile. Full reconstruction is $1 million a lane mile. So we're talking, exponential, factors of 10x's to those. And so we want to keep it in the 10,000, 100,000 range and not get too many in the million.
Is that asphalt or concrete? When you say 1 million?
That's one of those weird things. I think when you look at life cycle, asphalt, and again, these are rough order of magnitudes, but with mill and overlays, we're only talking asphalt. And usually when we're talking concrete, it is the million, because again, when we take out asphalt, we're putting back concrete. We don't go back with asphalt. And then again, that's just the payment as you look at Daniel Dale Road. And we'll look at that with the bond as well as Cedar Ridge. So are there any more questions for council?
I want to culminate this discussion with a comment that what we have seen, when we go through the budget process up to this point, I'll say up until Greg's point, has been short-range planning. We're looking at 1 year at a time. What we have seen and what Greg is presenting to us is a long-range plan going out into fiscal year 27. And actually, if we asked him, he can go beyond that. But the slides just get longer and longer and longer. But what it means is that his office and his eyes and his street superintendent are constantly looking at the most important thing that our customers look at, our citizens look at, is what they drive on. They like it or not, it's what is my drive like today? And yeah, I hit a bump, I hit a pothole, I cracked a rim, I got a flat tire. But, and it's what's out in front of your house. What's the street like in front of my house? And what Greg is giving to us is this long-range view of what's necessary for what we take for granted. And that's the sustainability and the maintenance of our infrastructure, both the water and both in the streets. And without it, we don't have a city. And so it's so important for us to take into consideration what Greg is giving to us and put this in such a high priority. In terms, Mark, you brought it up, we're flatlining it. At least the city recognized the necessity to start putting money towards streets. Because without that, we'd be in desperate shape. And so looking at that, looking at the pipe bursting, and these are things that the city hadn't done before, but they're necessary so that we don't have downtime in terms of getting water to our citizens, or they're having to travel on streets and looking at our emergency, our first responders, having to go down a street that they can't get through for some reason or another because that street's in such terrible condition, it's deteriorated. I look at these, the delineation of the detail that Greg and his folks have gone to delineate this street, this alley, this portion of this city, this is what it's gonna take, this is when we can do it, and this is what it's gonna cost. It's so important for us as a council to digest this and to be able to discuss it with our constituency. Because they need to understand, okay, why isn't this happening? Well, let me tell you why. Because this is when your street is programmed, because this is when it's good setting in its priority in terms of its condition. And that's why when I look at this stuff and say, this is so important, it looks like minutia, but it's not. And I don't want it to be understated in terms of our understanding as a council, being able to communicate to our citizens as well, how important this infrastructure sustainability and maintenance is. So thanks, Greg, you know, and looking at that, it's almost frightening, really, but knowing that you got a handle on it and seeing it in black and white says, this has been looked at. We know where we're going. This is the future. It has a plan. It's not out there some big bogus kind of a question like, but what are we doing in 24 and 25? We know because of what you've done. And I appreciate that. It's great help.
Thanks, sir. It's a team effort.
Now I have one question.
Sir.
I went back through all of Jennifer's slides. I didn't see the automated water metering anywhere.
Can we have that as a separate discussion in our council meeting?
It's part of the budget.
Yeah, it's a closed session conversation.
Oh, it's a okay. Well, no, I asked the question, I got an answer, but it's it's not in here, and it's something we have to do. Okay.
Yeah, we need to do that in closed session.
At a high level, that was a initiative that was led by the finance director to pending new guidance from city manager.
I got it. Never mind. We're done. Okay. Any other questions or comments for Greg before he goes away?
We'll talk bond. I'll still be standing up.
The hour is approaching 9:15.
This is the
We
last.
are going to finish tonight, folks.
So, again, this is an update for council on the 2018 bond project, and then this is a combination between me and the park director, Mr. Bart Stevenson. Just to run through the timeline, so we've been working on the planning and the roll-up of the bond program since February of 2018. When we created the Bond Advisory Committee. As you'll see, the other milestones, so the Bond Advisory Committee considered multiple projects well exceeding the $21 million that we had, and so there was a big narrowing down process culminating in recommendations to council of what they were proposing, the amounts of money they were proposing in each of these different propositions, and the recommended projects. In November was when the voters approved the bond. All 4 of the propositions were approved, totaling $21.6 million. In March of 2019, the bond funds became available, and that's really when the process really took off and staff moved out on beginning to execute those projects. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Stevenson to talk about his project.
All right, talk a bit about the parks projects. Again, it was $6.6 million total. For the 5 projects that were included in the bond proposition. Kidsville Splash Pad project here at Armstrong Park. The park board and the council approved the concept design back in spring of 2019. We then moved into the design of the project and we completed that in summer of 2000. You're aware yes.
I had 3 phone calls this week because of summer and heating up. Where's my swimming pool? When are you gonna build a swimming pool?
We're not.
And I said, we're not. But I was able to
comes with lots
tell
of
them about the
O&M.
splash pad and people are happy.
Yeah. Swimming pools are lots of O&M, and a lot of pools in the Dallas-Fort Worth area aren't opening or having limited hours this year. There's a severe lifeguard shortage, so that's how it
But
works.
our
So,
constituents are wondering where's our pool, and I'm happy to be able to tell them we're not gonna have one.
good. Right answer. As you're aware, we applied for a Texas Parks and Wildlife grant for $750,000. We were awarded that grant. And I spoke to our grants coordinator with Texas Parks and Wildlife at 4:55 today, so I'd have the most updated information to share with you. It has still not been signed off by the National Park Service and the Texas Parks and Wildlife. Our funding is federal dollars. They have an agreement that they need to complete between those two entities. That has not happened yet. They were supposed to have it done by June 1. It is now June 30. It's not done yet. He says any day. So as soon as he can get that from the National Park Service, he can then turn around and execute our agreement with us and give us the notice to proceed, which will be the procurement process. Fortunately for us, we're already working with our two different suppliers, both for Leathers Playgrounds for the playground and Craftsman for the splash pad. So we're going to do buy board contracts with both of those. So once we get the go-ahead from Texas Parks and Wildlife, we should be able to move fairly quickly. So we're still kind of on schedule for starting construction this fall, have it open by next summer.
That's what I told them,
Right answer.
next summer.
Rotary Park parking lot, that was the first thing we completed right off the bat. That was a fairly easy project. At the time that we had a newly hired concrete crew in-house, so that was done in-house with our concrete crew that we talked about earlier tonight.
So we made our budget.
Yes, we were within our budget, absolutely. So there's a nice rendering of the concept plan for the park. We're working on the village area there in the middle. That's where the new Leathers Playground, which will look very similar to the current playground as far as the overall theming and look of it. However, it will not be real wood, as you know, it'll be that composite plastic material. And then the beach area is our splash pad. There's a new parking lot at Rotary Park. Moving on, the Harrington Park project, we are currently out to bid now for a construction manager at risk for the construction of that project. The design is complete. We expect those bids back later next month. Again, we hope to be under construction this fall and back open again in the following spring. That includes the additional parking lot, lighting, the baseball and soccer concession restroom facilities, and of course the bridge that's going to connect Waterview Park to Harrington Park.
You say back open, is it closing completely?
It will pretty much close down completely during that time. We'll have too much construction going on. We'll have to have public access to the park during that time.
And they've already allocated where they're going from,
We've already worked with the youth sports associations, and they're going to either not play or they're going to work with the other associations in the area to play in their facilities during the fall season.
Thanks.
The Lakeside Pavilion project is complete. We most recently just finished the parking lot and added a bunch of landscaping. It really looks nice. It's getting a lot of rave reviews from the community, and it is already booked out for many, many, many months. We have lots of large family gatherings here in Duncanville, and this has been a great asset to our park system.
And how much does it cost to rent out?
I believe it's $100, $50 an hour.
An hour?
$50 an hour for a resident. Yes, for residents. And then our trails, we most recently, again, as been mentioned previously, we've started the loop on-trail bike lane markings that was done here most recently. We're now working with procurement to put the signage up along the roadways. That will be complete here in this summer. Future construction projects for the trails are really to be determined. As we talked about with Mr. Remy earlier about the Daniel Dale project, we had set aside the additional bond monies kind of to be our match for that Texas Transportation Alternative Program I talked about earlier. That didn't happen, but we will have monies available on our side if we need them for matching grants through the bond funds or any other projects the park board and the council sees fit for our future trail program.
When will this make the website with the trails and the bike lanes?
Once we get the signage up, then we'll start advertising.
So we'll put it on the
Absolutely.
website?
Absolutely. So, and as Councilmember Cooks mentioned previously, we're always looking for grants. This is the Daniel Dale project in particular is a great opportunity for grants because it does have a connection for the city of Duncanville to our neighbors in Dallas and DeSoto. And most of those folks who provide those grants look for those multi-jurisdictional projects. That is it on parks, and there's of course the new pavilion with the landscape.
Again, I'll be talking again on Proposition B for streets, $6.6 million. High level first, as you'll see, we've got the East Danieldale project. That's the one currently under construction. Cedar Ridge Drive is the one that is just in the beginning phases of design. And as you know, there's a study to help us sort of hone in on the optimal location for that segment along Cedar Ridge. But street bond number 3, as you look at these, the actual costs and the estimated costs for Cedar Ridge, the bottom line is with the construction increases that we've seen, we had hoped back in 2018 to do 3 roads with the money, but we're down to basically being able to fund 2. About $500,000 that's residual of these is basically just enough for contingency. However, if this one comes in lower than estimate, if the market sort of changes by the time this is designed, and we don't need the contingency, we will certainly come back to council for additional guidance on a potential street bond project number 3. And again, just looking at the construction schedule on Danieldale, as you know, it's already underway. It will be completed in summer of 2022. That's an 18-month construction project. We're looking at a design schedule of approximately a year on the Cedar Ridge design, and then followed with, again, another 18-month construction project. So that project will be completed, estimated in fall of 2023. Yes, sir.
Will you provide periodic operational and financial updates on these projects as they unfold?
Yes.
And when I say financial, you have numbers up there now, so that's an estimate, and so as the numbers are spent, how do they compare to those numbers?
He just wants us to provide it to them.
In terms of how it
We'll
looks.
keep bringing it back to council.
Okay, we can certainly incorporate this into our quarterly updates that we do with the council.
That'd be good.
I just wanted to, I don't really have any good pictures for you yet, unlike Mr. Stevenson. It's a bunch of holes in the ground. So I just want to continue with the design, the end state of this segment. From our landscaping plan, I thought that was the best rendering. So again, we're looking at a 4-lane divided road, new landscaping through the corridor, some additional enhancement at the entrance, and then additional on both sides. Of particular note, we're disrupting the medians, and so we're putting in a new minor gateway monument off to the south side, again, which is the smaller scale version of the monuments that we will put on US 67.
How much are those?
I don't remember what this one cost in at. We estimated that the ones on Danieldale were in the 200s. I think we got a little bit better deal on the bid than when they came in for the monument, the landscape monuments, but I do not recall what this particular feature work was in the contract that we awarded.
Around 100.
Okay.
What's your best case scenario for this whole project to be completed?
This one here?
No, I'm talking about the whole concept, all the way down to Clark Road.
If you're saying to make this the final end state all the way down?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you. I don't have enough fidelity on what kind of money the predictable sources of money that I can project. This segment here is roughly half a mile long. And with the utilities involved, it was a $7 million project. And Daniel Dale Road corridor along this section is approximately 3 more miles.
So who keeps the whip snapping to make sure that this finishes?
If you,
At least in my lifetime.
You got a camera?
that becomes the city manager yelling at council and me working with staff to make sure that we're staying on top of them and providing those updates. As we start to move through this and we're doing our new website, we want to make it more interactive so that you can see where we are and what are the steps. And so between myself and Mr. Brown, we will be making sure that we can complete some stuff we started this year.
So we
Keep it moving.
will never end up with the bike path to nowhere.
That would be a goal. And as you look at the long-range planning the mayor talked about, that's part of what Mr. Ramey will be focusing on.
Maybe in your lifetime, the Clark Road.
It won't look like that, according to what I've seen before, just one lane.
No, well, the one that is the interim, which is basically keeping the pavement we have on Daniel Dale and just taking 2 lanes out of commission, that's like $3 million.
Yeah.
To do this is $42 million. And again, it's roughly half utility fund and half street CIP bond project, which would be really the 2 methods of funding.
These are the types of projects that when they had the Tiger grants that were very popular to propose during that time period. And a lot of communities were going after those funds. And so as the federal transportation starts to make funding available, it helps us to get toward that.
We're barking. So this kind of ties us into, over 10 years ago, I was at a transportation meeting and I saw comprehensive bike plans that were both at Cedar Hill and DeSoto. So they were way ahead of us in having those completed and connected.
We do have a local bike plan that we have adopted here in Duncanville. We did that when probably 2014, I believe. In addition to that, we most recently just completed a project with the best Southwest cities for an update to the VeloWeb, the COGS bike connection plan. And we did a focused area on just the best Southwest area and how we can connect to our neighboring cities. So that was just completed as well.
So this is,
So we do
this
have a
is
plan in
all
place.
in
We have several plans in
conjunction.
place.
Yeah, we're kicking things off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The VeloWeb was briefed at the RTC for the COG 2.5 years ago. So it's on somebody's radar. It's just a matter of putting all the pieces together because we have cities that have to talk to each other and cities have to coordinate. Yeah, but the VeloWeb is still alive and well at the COG.
Thank you.
Moving on to the firefighting facility, again, $6 million was part of the proposition. Identifying, negotiating, and acquiring the site location, I believe is in the very final stages of getting the land, securing both parcels. Again, we had 1 parcel, but we've had to put out extra effort to get the second parcel. We are having the design completed this fall with the construction schedule winter through spring. So this is approximately a 12-month, 15-month construction. So you'll see here the itemized pricing. I want to highlight that numbers in blue are actuals. They represent contracted amounts. And the black are still construction estimates. One change, I think, from when I briefed council and y'all selected option 2, this rendering right here is your the elevation for the fire station. We were planning on having about only $600,000 in land acquisition costs, but I'm bumping it back up to $1 million for that.
That's for the one or for two?
Well, for both, just by the
We already
time.
own one.
We own one.
We purchased that for.
We bought that one for about $220.
You got a good deal, you got a good deal on that, Mr. Cooks.
And then I don't feel comfortable saying anything more, sir.
All right, thank you.
But right now, we're looking at a total cost of $7.4 million. The bond funds will cover 6, and we're looking at securing 1.4 million in other funds. As we've talked about before, again, at the previous conversations, we had some one-time project funds available due to roof savings from our buildings, but that is still a shortfall.
A financial question. Other funds, meaning other funds of the city, or other funds, meaning other resources needed?
We've got to identify, when we spoke before, I know Mr. Summerlin talked about having some funds that were available from our investment interest earning in that account. That's still, at the point in time we were having that discussion, we felt that it would be enough to cover any gap, but it's not that much money. And so that's when we start looking at fund balance and actual other funding we have. And so I'll be working with our finance team to come up with an answer to you of what is available to cover the shortfall.
And I just needed some clarification for myself, because like I said earlier, I'm a numbers guy, and so when you say other funds, I start thinking general, special revenue, capital projects, et cetera, et cetera. But funds also means resources, so other resources.
But I think what we're hearing, if I'm not correct, all of these funds are internal. There are no external resources available to make up the shortfall.
Not currently.
There you go.
And that's where you're going, right, Pat?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's all internal resource.
I'll turn it over to Mr.
I think this is the last slide. Service center project, again, we've completed that design about 6 months ago. We went out to bids recently, and we received those bids on June 4th. We received 8 bids. However, we'll be coming back to you at your July 20th meeting to recommend rejection of those bids. We had issues with all of them. There were a couple that were within our budget range, which was good news. However, there were some anomalies and some issues within those bids that caused us concern, both with our consultants as well as our staff. And so we're going to look to regroup on this project, circle back around, perhaps go a different route using the CMAR, the Construction Manager at Risk process. We can better control our costs that way. And we talked about yesterday, and we've talked about again today, construction costs are a bit high right now. So perhaps this delay will be benefit to us in the long run, and allow those construction costs to come back down as well.
Do you have to come back to us, or based on what you just said, can you just reinitiate new action?
According to our purchasing manager, we do need to,
Do what you
you
gotta
have to
do.
officially reject the bids.
We got it, okay.
I think it'll be, that's a consent item, I assume, that consent?
Okay.
As soon as we get, circle back around at a staff level, we'll certainly keep you informed as to how we move through this project.
Mayor and council, this has been a very extensive process, but I believe, and I want to start first and foremost by thanking our team. This team is spectacular. I mean, the work and effort that they put into this. We actually developed this from scratch over the last 2 weeks or 1 week. It's not even been 2 weeks. It's been a week and a half. And so I want to thank each of them for their efforts and applaud their knowledge and understanding of what they do and what's needed. And I think now is a team approach where we want to partner and work with you, the council, and moving forward with the next phase, which will be the city manager presenting my draft budget. Any questions, thoughts, concern, or feedback? I've received some from council members of things you want to see included, including policy types of things. But anything that you think of, please send it to me as we start to develop our final draft for my proposed budget to council. And again, I want to thank each of you, mayor, council members, for taking the time and sitting down and working with us in a collective fashion, and I look forward to our next phase.
So will you put, so those things that we're giving you that we'd like to see, are you gonna put a wish list up from us?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'd like to get them as quickly as possible because I'd like to have them by my staff discussion next week because I'd like to marry them up against. One example I'll say to you just quickly is we look to see where there's some sharing of opportunities. For example, someone may ask for a software that the other person, and so we're trying to pull them together, and then I will show you everything that was recommended, even things that were not necessarily selected this year, because there might be some things that you hadn't thought about that may be a priority for you, and we can discuss them as we move through this process. Again, thank you. Mayor?
Any pros and comments from council? Saying that, we are adjourned at 9:37. Thank you.